This little bastard had his first kill at 4, got his bones cooked in liquid metal at 10, had his eye literally kicked out of his skull mid-fight, and kept swinging. Izuku walked out covered in blood, with a list in his head and 100 years of rage in his bones. Nobody on that list made it.
Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
The first time he killed a man, he was 4 years old. He had been burning up for 2 days. His mother pressed cool cloths to his forehead and sang the lullaby her grandmother had sung in the old house in Sapporo, and Izuku Midoriya tried to hold on to the words. They kept slipping away. The fever was eating through him in a way Inko had never seen, a heat that made his skin feel like it belonged to someone older than the small body shaking under the blanket. She kept telling him he would be fine. He believed her because he was 4, and because she was Inko, and because believing her was the only thing that worked. She had stepped out of the bedroom for more water when the door downstairs splintered. Izuku heard the sound through the fever, a voice he failed to recognize. Heavy boots on the apartment floor. His mother's voice rising fast into a question, then breaking into a sound he had never heard her make before. A scream. Something inside him moved that had been still for every year of this short life. It came up from a place deeper than his ribs. It came up out of bone. He saw a forest he had never walked through. He saw a woman with red hair he had never met. He saw a man in a uniform pointing a gun at a child who looked like him and was him, and also wasn't. The fever broke into a roar inside his head, and underneath the roar there was a name he had carried for 100 years and forgotten until this instant. He swung his legs off the bed. The floor was cold. His knees buckled, then held. His vision pulled into a kind of focus that was older than 4. He could smell the man down the hall. Sweat, alcohol, the cheap copper plating of a knife. He could smell his mother's blood on the apartment's tile. He clenched his small fists. Snicked. 3 jagged white spikes tore out of the skin between his knuckles on each hand. Bone, wet and red, splitting through the soft baby skin of a 4-year-old child. The pain reached him a beat after the sound. He looked at his hands. The boy who lived in his head looked at his hands too and laughed a tired laugh and welcomed the pain home. He moved through the bedroom door. The villain was a thin man with a rope of veins down one arm and the sour smell of someone living 3 days behind on sleep. He had Inko on the floor. He had a knife at her face. He turned at the sound of the door, ready to laugh at whatever child had found a bad day to be small. The laugh failed. Izuku crossed the room. The villain lunged with the knife. The blade glanced off something inside the boy's wrist that should have been soft and was instead stone. And the man's arm jerked sideways. Izuku tackled him. They went into the wall together, and the bone claws went through the man's chest with the dry crunch of fresh bread breaking. He pinned the villain there, claws sunk deep into drywall and ribs, and stood on his toes to keep the body up off his small frame. The villain's mouth tried to make a word. It made only a wet shape. Izuku held him there until the heart he could hear with his fever-sharpened ears stopped its panic, slowed, and went still. Then he stepped back and the body slid down the wall and crumpled at his feet. He turned to his mother. Inko was breathing. Her cheek was cut. Her eyes were huge and white in a face that had gone the color of old paper. She was looking at him, and the thing in him that was older than 4 wanted to look away because it knew the look. He had earned that look from 100 women across 100 years, and he had hated himself for it every time. Izuku, she whispered. The bone claws were still out. He looked down at them. Blood drained off the tips and made little pools on the floor. Underneath the blood, the wounds in his knuckles were already pulling closed. Pink new skin lifted up around the bone and seamed itself shut. Izuku, baby, her voice. He clung to it the way a drowning man clings to wood. He came back to 4 years old in pieces, the roar in his head pulled away. He looked at her again and saw her instead of a memory of someone else, and the bone claws slid back into his hands with a soft crack and a flash of pain. He sat down on the floor next to his mother and put his head in her lap. Inko stroked his hair. She was shaking. He could feel it through his cheek. That was where the police found them. That was where the doctor came. The doctor showed up in a cream-colored suit and round glasses and a kind, soft face that smelled wrong. Izuku registered it the way a young animal registers something. The smell wasn't a chemical smell. It was an emotional one. The man was excited. The man was hungry. The man was hiding both behind a smile that had been practiced in front of a mirror for years. He smelled the way buyers smell at a slave market. Izuku had never been to a slave market. The boy in his head had. "My name is Dr. Kyudai Garaki," the man said, kneeling so his face was level with Izuku's. He had brought a clipboard. He had brought soft eyes. He had brought a voice that had been used on hundreds of frightened children before. "May I take a look at your hands?" Izuku stayed still. He let the doctor lift his small palm and turn it. He let the man feel along the knuckles where the bone had come through. He let the man test the bone density with a careful pressure that the doctor passed off as gentleness. He smelled hunger increase. "Remarkable," Garaki murmured to Inko. "Your son has hyper-regeneration. The skin has already healed, but more importantly, the bone density readings are off the charts. He is rare. He is special. The world will need very kind people to protect him." Inko held Izuku's shoulders. Her hands were still trembling. She was hearing the word special the way every desperate parent in a hard world hears it. Izuku felt her fear ease one notch and felt the doctor's pleasure rise one notch in response. And he learned in that minute the most important lesson he would ever learn about how predators handle prey. Garaki packed his bag with the same gentle movements. He bowed to Inko. At the door, he turned back and crouched again so his face was level with Izuku's small one. He smiled, and the smile was warm, and the smile smelled like rotten meat under a clean sheet. "Come to me," Garaki said softly, "when you want true power." He left a card. He left. Izuku stared at the card on the table. He was 4 years old. He failed to fully understand the words, but the boy in his head understood them the way a man understands the click of a hammer being pulled back behind him in the night, and he carried them down into the marrow of his bones and put them away there where the cold lived. That night, Inko held him and cried into his hair. "My brave boy," she said. "My brave, brave boy." He let her hold him. The thing in him that was older than 4 held perfectly still and let her keep her son. 6 years passed, he grew. He grew fast and he grew wrong. In a way the school doctors called early bloomer and shrugged at. He was 10 and looked 12 and moved like a small man who had already lived a long life. He was kind to his mother. He was steady around her, gentle with her hands, slow in the kitchen, careful with her tea. She noticed. She loved him for it. She also noticed the way he sometimes stared past her at a wall as if he were listening to something she had any way to hear, and she let him stare because all mothers learn early which questions to leave for later. He kept his bone claws to himself. He had practiced them in the woods behind the school. Out, in. Out, in. He had learned to keep the knuckle wounds healing as fast as the bones came through so he wouldn't bleed through his school uniform. He had learned to do it without flinching. The boy in his head had given him the trick. The boy in his head had given him 100 tricks, and the boy in his head had a name now that came to him in dreams sometimes. Logan. And a face that was older than the bathroom mirror. He did his homework. He minded his teachers. He let other children have the toys. He was the still one in any room, in the way of a wolf around lambs that have yet to learn it's a wolf. He loved his mother more than anything that had ever been loved by anyone. And that love was the only soft thing inside him. It was that love that hit the wall of copper. He was walking home from school. The autumn air was clean and dry. He had been listening to a sparrow on a wire. The sparrow stopped singing the way they do when something larger than them moves 3 blocks away, and he registered the stop the way other people registered the click of a door closing in a hallway. Then the wind shifted. The smell of his mother's blood arrived in the same breath as the smell of 3 other men. He dropped his school bag. He ran. He ran the way the boy in his head had taught him to run, low to the ground, breath through the nose, eyes ahead of his feet. The smell of her got stronger. He turned down an alley he had never gone down because his nose led him there, and he heard the laughter of men who were leaving. He came around the corner. Inko was on the wet ground. The men were 3. They had the look of people hired for a job. He could smell that too. Someone had paid them recently, in cash. Despite there was a man with a green quirk that had left burn marks down her arms. There was a man with a long iron pipe, still slick with red. There was a man with a white grin and the smell of money in his breath pocket. She had been gone perhaps 4 minutes. Izuku stood there at the mouth of the alley. He could fail to move. Then the smell of her hit him again, and the world went white. The bone claws came out. Snicked. 3 on each hand, ripping through the knuckles in a spray of red, and he was already in the air before the men registered him. His body was 10 years old. His mind was 100. He hit the man with the pipe first, and the bone claws went through the man's throat the way nails go through pine, and the pipe clattered on wet asphalt as the body folded down. The other 2 turned. The man with the green quirk threw a wave of acid. It hit Izuku in the chest. His shirt melted off his small frame. His skin under it bubbled and ran like hot wax. He felt it. He kept moving. He went through the acid. He went through the man. The 3rd one was running. Izuku was on him before he made the alley mouth. Claws into hamstring, claws into ribs, claws into the back of the skull. The man dropped. Izuku stood over him. He was breathing through his teeth. He was bleeding from his chest. His skin was steaming as the healing factor pulled itself through the acid burns. He was crying and didn't know it, and the boy in his head let him cry because that was the one thing the boy in his head could give a child this small in a moment this big. Then he heard the others coming. He had counted 3. There were 9. The other 6 were down the block, and they had been waiting to make sure the first 3 did the job, and now they were moving in to make sure the boy did too. Garaki had been thorough. Garaki had paid for thoroughness. They came in fast. Izuku tried. He fought. He fought with the ferocity of every parent of every child who has ever been killed, and he was a child himself, and his body weighed 40 kilos, and his skeleton was bone instead of metal, and his healing factor was the only thing standing between him and the morgue. He took a punch that broke his orbital bone. He took a kick that cracked his ribs. He took a slash across the back that opened him from shoulder to hip. He kept going. His claws found bodies. He brought one of them down and another. Then a fist hit him in the temple hard enough to split his scalp to the bone, and his vision blacked out, and when it came back he was on the ground and someone was kicking his eye into the back of his head. He felt the eye go. He heard them laugh. He heard one of them say, "He's just a kid, geez." Garaki really wanted this kid hurting, huh? Garaki. When the men were finished, they left him there. He could hear his mother's heart faintly, somewhere beside him. It made one more beat. Then it stopped. The space where it had been kept thumping in his chest like a phantom limb. Rain started to fall. He lay there for what might have been an hour. His healing factor pulled the eye back into the socket and built it new. His ribs cracked back into place and reset. The open skin along his back stitched itself together in long red ropes. His chest mended last because the acid had eaten all the way down to the cartilage of his sternum, and the cartilage took a long time to rebuild from scratch. When he could move, he sat up. He looked at her. He took her hand. It was already cold. He sat there for a long time, holding her hand, with the rain coming down on both of them and washing the blood off the alley floor in pink rivulets. Garaki's voice came back to him, softly, from a kitchen 6 years ago. "Come to me when you want true power." He looked at his hands, his 10-year-old hands. The bone claws slid out of the knuckles. They were strong. They were sharp. They had taken 3 men and most of a 4th and the rest of a beating that should have killed him. They had failed to be enough. He let the claws slide back in. He stayed there with her until the police came. He told them his name. He told them what he had seen. And he left out the part where he had killed 3 of the men because the bodies were gone by then. Garaki's people had cleaned up. and because there was nothing in him that wanted to talk to a stranger in a uniform about what had happened in the alley, the funeral was small. His father sent flowers from somewhere overseas and said nothing else. Izuku stood at the grave in a black suit that didn't fit. He had grown a centimeter in the 4 days between her death and the burial. He stood with his hands in his pockets. He stayed silent. The boy in his head was silent next to him, and the silence between them was as heavy as a coffin lid. He went home. He cleaned the apartment. He folded her clothes. He boxed her photographs. He did the dishes. He sat on the kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet for 2 hours and refused to cry because the part of him that knew how to cry had been used up in the rain, and what was left in him now had a different shape and a different sound. He found the card. It was where Garaki had left it 6 years ago. Inko had kept it in the drawer of the small cabinet with her recipe books, the way some women keep emergency numbers and others keep prayers. He looked at it. Garaki Kyudai. A phone number. An address. He folded it twice. He put it in his pocket. He went out into the night. The address was outside the city. A clean, unmarked building on a clean, unmarked road. He walked the whole way, 20 kilometers. His feet bled through his shoes, and the healing factor closed the blisters as fast as they opened. He arrived at dawn with his clothes wrinkled and his eyes the color of old grass. The door opened before he knocked. Garaki stood there. The same cream suit, the same round glasses, the same kind, soft face that smelled wrong. "Izuku," he said with the tenderness of a man who had been waiting 6 years to say the name. Come in, my boy. I am so terribly sorry about your mother." Izuku looked up at him. He held the man's eyes for a long count. Then he stepped past him into the building. Garaki closed the door behind them. The corridor smelled of bleach and antiseptic and machine oil. Underneath those, Izuku could smell other children, some of them very young, some of them very afraid, some of them dead. He filed all of that away the way the boy in his head had taught him to file things away. There would be a day for it later. Today was for something else. "Tell me what you want," Garaki said. "True power," Izuku answered, "because that was the deal." "Power for what?" Garaki asked, with the soft voice of a man already writing the answer down. Izuku held the doctor's eyes again. "Power they can't beat," he said. Garaki smiled. "Yes," he said. "Yes, my boy. Yes." He led Izuku to a room with a steel chair in the middle and a tank of something amber along the wall. He had Izuku sit. He had Izuku take off his shirt. He looked at the small body, already strong, already older than 10, already ridged with muscle that 10-year-olds usually lack, and he allowed himself one breath of pure delight. "What I'm going to do," he told Izuku, "is bind a metal called adamantium to your skeleton. Adamantium cannot be broken by any force on this earth. When the procedure is finished, your bones will be unbreakable. Your claws will be the deadliest weapons that have ever existed. You will be a king of your own life, Izuku. You will never be helpless again." Izuku looked at him. "Will it hurt?" "Yes," Garaki said. "Very much." "Good," Izuku said. Garaki laughed, and the laugh smelled like every wrong thing in the world. The procedure began. They strapped him to the steel chair, and they took him to a tank suspended by chains, and they fed tubes into every major bone he had, and then they boiled adamantium in a furnace at the back of the room, and they pushed it through the tubes into him. The metal entered him. The pain was beyond what any language has words for. He was 10 years old. The metal was hotter than the sun, and it ran inside his bones, and it filled the marrow, and it bonded to the ridges of his skeleton, and his nerves screamed every nerve they had into the room at the same time. His body convulsed, the straps held, the tubes pumped. The metal went into his ribs, his spine, his skull, his pelvis, his arms, his legs, his hands, the small bones of his fingers, the small bones of his feet. It went into the bone claws. It coated them. It sealed onto them. It made them what they were going to be from now on. He tried to scream. He failed to get enough air to make the scream he needed. His healing factor woke up. It tried to push the metal out. It failed. Metal was already bonded. The healing factor turned around and started keeping him alive instead, repairing the cooked tissue around the bones, repairing the vascular damage, repairing the burst capillaries in his eyes. Every time he edged toward unconsciousness, the healing factor pulled him back, because the body's own systems demanded he stay awake to feel his own salvation. It went on for hours. Inko came up out of him in the middle of it. He saw her. He saw her in the alley. He saw her laughing in the kitchen. He saw her at a window 3 years ago, watching it rain. He held those images, and the metal went into his skull, and his vision filled with white, and his teeth tried to grind down to powder against each other, and the adamantium under his teeth refused to let them. He held on. He held on. He held on. When the metal stopped flowing, he was floating. They had moved him into the containment tank. He was suspended in clear amber fluid. His eyes were open. His body was perfectly still on the outside. Inside, every cell was working at a pace it had never worked at before, knitting muscle and fat and skin around a skeleton that was now denser than diamond and would weigh him down for the rest of his life. He could see Garaki through the glass. Garaki was at a console. "Initiate the memory wipe," Garaki said. A technician keyed a sequence. A pulse of electricity hit Izuku's brain. Then another, then another. They were designed to scour him clean, to take the boy who had walked through that door and leave only the weapon. Garaki had used the protocol on 23 other test subjects before this one. It had worked on 23 of them. 23 times he had walked away with a soldier and left the child behind. The pulse hit Izuku's brain. The boy in his head sat up. Logan, who had survived the original Weapon X project across an ocean and a century and a dimension, who had been wiped 100 times by men cleverer than Garaki, who had built out of his own mind a fortress that any procedure on Earth would fail to storm, opened his eyes for the first time in this life. The wipe failed. The wipe failed because the wipe had been designed to erase a child who knew nothing. Inside the child, there was a man who knew everything. The man wasn't a passenger. The man was the foundation. He had been waiting under the floorboards of this small body since the day it was born, listening, conserving strength, picking his moment. The pulses hit him and bounced off and amplified instead of erasing, because every shock just woke up another locked door. Garaki frowned at his console. "Run it again." The technician ran it. Inside the tank, Izuku's pupils contracted to pinpricks. His knuckles flexed, snicked. 6 adamantium claws, 6 steel bayonets so sharp they whistled in air, punched through the wall of the containment tank. The amber fluid blew outward in a wave. Glass and metal and chemical solutions sluiced across the laboratory floor. Alarms screamed. Izuku stepped out of the tank. He was 11 now. The procedure had taken 6 months. His muscle had built itself thick around the new skeleton in the weeks of the healing. He stood barefoot in the wreckage in a hospital gown that the fluid had washed mostly clear. The adamantium claws gleamed silver under the laboratory lights. His skin steamed where the surface burns from the procedure were closing. 6 guards came into the room with weapons up. He went through them. He went through them like a wood chipper goes through wet branches. The first man he disarmed by going under the rifle and bringing both clawed hands up through the man's belly until the points came out the man's back. The second he opened across the throat with one swing. The third tried to use a quirk that turned his skin to stone, and Izuku put the claws through the stone the way a chef puts a knife through ice. The fourth he split from sternum to crown in one downward motion that took the man's head off in 2 halves. The fifth tried to run. He died with the claws coming out of his lower back. The 6th dropped his weapon and began to pray. Izuku looked at him. The boy in his head said a thing under his breath. Izuku put the claws through the man's chest with the same straight push he had used on the very first villain who had broken into the apartment when he was 4. Because the body remembers, and the body had been remembering this exact motion for over 100 years, he stepped over the praying man. Garaki was already running. Izuku saw him at the end of the corridor, white coat flying. He could have caught him. He was faster now. His new skeleton had a weight he was already learning to use, and the weight made him a hammer. He let Garaki run. Something in him decided to let the doctor live. And the boy in his head agreed with the decision in a way the boy in his head rarely agreed with anything. There was a long debt to be paid. The debt had to be paid in full. Killing him here in the panic of the lab would be a partial payment. He had a feeling, older than him, deeper than him, that this man had to live a little longer and learn what the weight felt like. He walked out of the laboratory. The Japanese mountains were freezing in the dawn. Snow lay along the roads. He had a hospital gown on and bare feet and adamantium under his skin and grief in his chest, and the cold went through him, and the healing factor turned the cold into discomfort and refused to make it more. He walked. He walked for a long time. When he was sure he was clear of any pursuit, he stopped at the edge of a frozen ridge that overlooked a valley he had never seen before. The sky was iron gray, and the wind was a long, thin blade. He stood there, snow caught in his hair. He looked at his hands. He flexed them, snicked. 6 adamantium claws extended in the morning light. He tilted his head back. He howled. The sound tore out of him. It carried. It rolled across the valley and bounced off the far ridge and came back to him changed. It was the sound of a child who had been killed a year ago. It was the sound of a man who had been killed 2 centuries ago. It was the sound of every wound that had ever been put into him being opened at the same time so the blood could finally find the air. He howled until he had nothing left. Then he pulled the claws back in with a soft mechanical kiss and he started walking. 5 years passed. He survived because survival was the one thing that came easy. He moved between cities. He took whatever work was on the table, manual labor for a few weeks, dock work for a few more, then on to the next place when someone started looking too long at the boy with the rugged face who looked older than the papers said. He slept in rooms with thin walls. He ate cheap food and kept eating it long after his body told him it had stopped tasting good. He found the underground fighting circuits. The first one was in Osaka, in a basement under a ramen shop. He was 13. He walked in with a hood up and the kind of stillness that men in those rooms register before anything else. A bouncer tried to send him home. He showed the bouncer his hands. The claws came out a centimeter, then went back. The bouncer let him sign in. The first fight was against a man twice his size and 3 times his age, with a quirk that turned the air into glass shards. Izuku took the glass. He took it across his chest, his arms, his face. His clothes turned into red rags. The crowd went silent. The man kept throwing glass, and Izuku kept walking through it, healing as he came, and when he reached the man, he put his fist into the man's jaw, and the jaw came off the bone and went sideways, and the fight ended. The crowd sat there and stared at him. Izuku held his hand out. The bookkeeper paid him in cash. He took the cash. He left. He did the next fight a week later in Kobe. He won. He did it in Yokohama. He won. He did it in Sapporo. He won. He did it in Sendai. He won. He won every fight, and he took such damage in every fight that the bookkeepers started raising the odds against him because they failed to believe a kid who got hit that hard could keep walking out of the basement on his own legs. He won. He took the money. He moved. The smoking started in Kanazawa. A retired pro fighter at the bar shoved a cigar into his hand and told him he had the eyes for it. Izuku lit it. He took a drag. The smoke went into him and stayed there in the way a sound stays in a bell after it's been struck. The boy in his head had smoked cigars for 100 years. The body remembered. He kept smoking after that. He picked up the leather jacket in Nagoya off the back of a man who had pulled a knife on the wrong 15-year-old. He picked up the dog tags in a pawn shop in Hiroshima. He had walked past the window and stopped because the metal had hummed at him. He never learned whose tags they were. He put them on. He never took them off again. The white tank top was just what he wore. By 15, he looked 20. He had filled out into the body Logan would have had at 20 if Logan had ever been 20 in a peaceful country. His shoulders were wide. His jaw was a hard, flat shelf. His green eyes had a kind of ground-down stillness to them that made bartenders pour him whatever he asked for and made cops decide to walk on the other side of the street. He had a year left until UA would come for him. He had yet to learn that. What he did know was that the Yakuza had gotten interested in him. The bigger fight circuits ran through them. He had been winning so much and taking so much under the table that one of their lieutenants, a man named Ozaki, had made the decision to either own him or break him. Ozaki extended an invitation. Izuku turned it down. Ozaki extended a second invitation with 2 men in suits at the door of the cheap apartment Izuku was renting that month. Izuku left the apartment with the 2 men. He left the men on the street outside the apartment. They were breathing. Walking would be a problem for them for a while. He went back inside. He packed his bag. He took the train to Tokyo. In Tokyo, he found Ozaki's main warehouse on the docks. He went in alone. He walked through the front door and he started clearing rooms. The first 3 men he met were holding cards around a table with whiskey. He left them on the floor. The next 4 had time to draw weapons. He walked through them. 2 of them used quirks. One had a quirk that turned his hands into hammers. The hammers broke against the adamantium under Izuku's forearms, and the man went down screaming. He came around a corner and a kid was waiting with a pistol. 20 years old, maybe 19, hands shaking. The pistol was pointed at Izuku's chest. Izuku stopped walking. He looked at the kid. He saw a young face that hadn't grown into the work yet. He saw a man who had been told yesterday that this would be the night he proved himself. Izuku held up his right hand. The claws came out one at a time. Snicked. 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 The kid's pistol dropped 6 inches. "I'm not going to hurt you, kid," Izuku said. The claws of his right hand caught the light. He turned his head slowly toward the back office where Izuku could already smell Ozaki sweating through a silk shirt. But he is. The kid looked at the claws. He looked at the back office. He set the pistol on the floor. He turned around. He walked out the front door of the warehouse. He never came back to that line of work. Izuku walked through a Yakuza operation of 40 men in one night and emptied it. He left some of them alive, the ones who turned around and walked out, and he left the rest of them where they fell. He found Ozaki at a desk in the back office. He took the man's gun off his belt. He took his right ear. He told him to remember what taking an interest in Izuku Midoriya cost a man, and he left the warehouse with 20 million yen in a duffel bag and the smell of 40 different brands of fear in his nose. He was leaving the docks when a black scarf came at him out of the night. The scarf wrapped his arm. Izuku stopped walking. He turned his head. A man in a black jumpsuit was crouched on a shipping container above him, with hair like wet rope and red eyes glowing low under his goggles. The man was looking at Izuku the way a tired gardener looks at a weed he has yet to decide whether to bother with, Eraserhead. Izuku knew the name from the newspapers, an underground hero with a quirk that erased other quirks for as long as he kept his eyes open. Eraserhead's eyes were open. "Stop where you are," Eraserhead said. His voice came out flat and scraped, the voice of a man who had been awake for 3 days. "I am not in the mood. Do not make this difficult." Izuku looked at the scarf around his arm. Eraserhead's quirk was active. He could feel the pull. The tingle of erasure was in his skin. It was finding nothing to erase, because Izuku Midoriya's healing factor had evolved past being a quirk in the way Aizawa's eyes recognized. It had grown into the bone, and the bone was metal, and metal cared little for the will of any underground hero. He met the red eyes. "You can't erase metal, bub," he said. He pulled. The scarf went taut. Aizawa came off the container, twisted in midair, and landed on the dock in a roll. He came up with the scarf retracting around his wrist and the goggles slipping down his nose, and he looked at the boy in front of him with a new measure in his eyes. "All right," Aizawa said. He came in. The fight was real. Aizawa was good. Aizawa had 10 years of underground hero work in his bones, and he used every bit of it. The scarf was a weapon and a leash at the same time. He would wrap a wrist, redirect Izuku's swing, follow the redirect with a kick. He moved like a man who had figured out how to use his low body weight against larger fighters since before he could grow a beard. Izuku took hits. Aizawa's elbow opened his eyebrow. Aizawa's heel cracked his ribs. The capture weapon caught around his throat, and Aizawa pulled him into the side of a crate, hard enough to bend the wood inward. Izuku went down. He came up. The scarf came again. He let it wrap him this time. He grabbed the scarf with both hands. He pulled. Aizawa's tactical mind registered the new variable in time to brace. The brace failed. Izuku pulled him in like a fish. Aizawa came across the docks in a yanked sprint, and Izuku went to meet him, and they hit each other in the chest with the dock under their boots. Aizawa's teeth clicked together. He landed 3 hits to Izuku's solar plexus before Izuku could lift an arm. Izuku absorbed all 3. He drove his shoulder into Aizawa's chest. Aizawa flew back. He hit the side of the crate. He came down. Aizawa rolled to his feet, breathing hard. His eyes had closed for half a second to blink. They had to. The quirk. The quirk only worked on open eyes, and Izuku had been counting the blinks. He went in on the next one. He had a hand on Aizawa's throat before the eyes opened again. He held Aizawa there. Lifted. The man's boots dangled. Aizawa looked down at him. Izuku waited. The capture weapon could have wrapped his head and choked him. The quirk was useless. They both knew where the fight had landed. They had landed at the place where Aizawa would either be dropped or walk away. Aizawa raised his open hand, palm out. Yield. Izuku set him down. Aizawa stepped back from him, rubbing his throat. He looked at Izuku for a long minute. He looked at the duffel bag. He looked at the dock, at the warehouse, at the night. "Sit down, kid." Izuku considered him. He sat down on a crate. He pulled a cigar out of the inside pocket of his jacket, bit the cap off, and lit it with a match he scraped against the wood. The ember bloomed orange. He took a long draw and let it out slowly. Aizawa sat on the crate across from him. "You have a choice to make," Aizawa said. "You have made a habit of going through criminal organizations like wet paper. The government has been watching you for 2 years. You are now one of 3 things. You are about to be a hero. You are about to be a villain. You are about to be in Tartarus." Izuku looked at him through the smoke. "I am here to offer you the first option. UA, high school, hero course, class 1A. You start in 2 months. Izuku took another draw. Why? Because the man making the decision watched the security footage of what you did to Ozaki, and he asked me a question. Which was, whether you were bored. Izuku looked at him. The corner of his mouth pulled up. Aizawa's mouth stayed flat. He thought you were. I think he was right. So I am going to ask you to come work with us. Train. Spend 3 years in a building where nobody will be afraid of you because all of them are dangerous. Get out of the basements. Use what you have for something. Izuku considered the dock. He considered the smell of the Pacific. He considered an alley 6 years ago that wasn't there anymore. He considered the iron in his own bones. He blew smoke out. The smoke caught on the harbor light and curled. "I'm the best there is at what I do," he said. "But what I do isn't very nice. You sure you want me around kids?" "We've had worse problems," Aizawa said. Izuku turned the cigar over in his fingers. "Garaki Kyudai," he said. Aizawa's eyes shifted. He had been the one to put the file together on what had happened in the mountains 5 years ago. The lab the police had found, full of bodies and one cracked containment tank. He had read the file 12 times. He had never said the name to Izuku. Izuku said it to him now. "Yes," Aizawa said. "Is he being hunted?" "Not yet. We know enough to guess at him. We lack proof. We lack his location. We have heard a rumor about a partnership he is forming with a man called All for One. We have heard a rumor about a creation called a Nomu. Beyond that, we have Shadow." Izuku looked at him. "If I come to your school, will I find him?" Aizawa held his eyes. "If you come to our school," he said, "we will find him together." Izuku took a long draw on the cigar. The smoke went out into the night. He looked at the duffel bag of yen on the dock between his boots. He looked at the wet wood. He looked at the harbor lights and the way the water caught them. "All right," Bub, he said. He stood up. He picked up the duffel bag. He walked off the docks with Aizawa one step behind him, and Tokyo's night took the two of them in. The 2 months between the docks and the first day at UA were the strangest of his life. Aizawa put him in a small apartment near the school. He paid rent for the first month out of the money he had taken from Ozaki. The school filled in the second month with a stipend that came on official letterhead. He bought a refrigerator. He bought a knife. He bought a coffee maker. He sat in the apartment in the evenings and watched the city through the window and felt the weight of his own bones in a way he had been refusing to feel for 5 years. Aizawa came once a week. They trained on the rooftop. They sparred. They drank coffee. Aizawa asked questions and Izuku answered the ones he wanted to. The questions were mostly about what Izuku could do, and Aizawa wrote the answers down on a small notepad that he kept in his pocket and that he had torn pages out of for 15 years. He asked one question that wasn't about ability. "What was your mother like?" Izuku thought about it. "She liked the rain," he said. "She made bad tea. She forgave me for everything before I did it." Aizawa wrote that down too. He looked at the page for a long count. He closed the notebook. "All right," he said. UA. High school received him in April, on the first day of the term, in a uniform that he had thrown the jacket of into the back of his closet because it itched. He had agreed to the white shirt. He had agreed to the slacks. He had agreed to the tie because Aizawa had given him a look. He had refused to comb his hair. He came in through the gates with his dog tags hanging out of his collar and a cigar tucked behind his ear, and the smell of last night's cheap whiskey still on his breath. And the gate guard let him through because the gate guard had been told to. He walked across the front grounds at his own pace. Other students moved around him. He was the only one in his year who walked alone. The first-year intake was loud, jittery, fizzing with the energy of teenagers who had taken the entrance exam and beaten it, and were now trying to look like they had expected to. They moved in clumps. They watched each other for cues. They watched Izuku Midoriya the way you watch a dog you cannot see the leash on, and Izuku ignored them in a way that only made the watching worse. Class 1A was on the 3rd floor. He reached it. He found his seat. He sat down. He put his feet on the desk. He pulled the cigar from behind his ear and looked at it, decided against lighting it indoors, and put it back. The other students filed in. Ida Tenya came in first, all upright posture and chopping arm gestures. He looked at Izuku, and his eyes went straight to Izuku's feet on the desk. His eyes did the small movement of a man preparing to deliver a polite correction. Izuku met his eyes. Ida adjusted his glasses, sat down 2 rows over, and saved the correction for later. His sense of the room was good. He knew when a man's stillness was an open invitation. Uraraka Ochako came in with her bag pressed to her chest and her eyes wide and bright. She saw Izuku. Her smile did the thing all warm smiles do when they hit something cold. It stayed up. But the muscles around it learned a new tension. She walked to her seat. She sat down. She kept her eyes off him after that because looking at him felt like looking into something that was looking back, and she had to gather herself first. Todoroki Shoto came in and sat by the window. He noticed Izuku. He registered him. He held his head still. The temperature of the air on his right side dropped 0.5 degree, and the temperature of the air on his left side rose 0.5 degree, and his face stayed exactly the same. The rest of the class came in. Asui Tsuyu, whose eyes never blinked and whose face was the most honest face Izuku had ever seen on a teenager. Kaminari Denki, who slid in already laughing at his own joke before he had finished telling it. Kirishima Eijiro, who stopped at the door, scanned the room, saw Izuku, and grinned in the open way of a young man who had decided to be friends with everyone on principle. Yayorozu Momo, who took her seat with a gravity older than her 16 years. Ashido Mina, who made noise. Sero Hanta, who chose stillness. Bakugo Katsuki came in last. He came in loud. He came in already angry. He came in the way he always came in, because that was the only door he knew how to open. He saw Izuku in the seat where he expected to sit, in the seat he had circled in his head the night before, because he wanted the seat by the window away from the door so he could keep his back to the wall. He stopped. His red eyes narrowed. Move. Izuku looked at him over the desk. He took his feet off it. He put them on the floor. He stayed in the seat. Sit somewhere else, bub. Bakugo's hands lit. The orange flame ran along his palms. Izuku met his eyes. Go ahead. Take your shot. Bakugo took it. The explosion was a crack of orange that swallowed the front row of desks. It came at Izuku's face in a fist of fire and concussion. The heat would have burned a normal student to the seat. Izuku raised his hand. He caught the explosion. He caught it the way you catch a baseball. The boom went into his palm and stayed there. The flesh on his palm cooked. The smoke curled. The class went perfectly still. Bakugo's eyes, already large, went a touch larger because his explosion had landed on a hand and the hand had taken it and the hand was steaming. Izuku turned his palm over so Bakugo could see it. The skin was black. The black skin pulled apart in places. Underneath the black skin and the pulling, there was the gleam of a metal that nobody in the room had ever seen on the inside of a person before. The adamantium lay across the bones of his palm in a flat, mirror-bright sheet. The skin closed over it. Pink new skin came up. The black, scorched skin sloughed off. In 10 seconds, his palm was unmarked. He looked at Bakugo. Bakugo's mouth was open. Izuku put his feet back on the desk. He said nothing else. The class breathed back in. Aizawa came through the door in his sleeping bag. Sit down, Bakugo. Bakugo's hands were still trembling. He looked at Izuku. He looked at the seat. He looked at his own hand, where the explosion he had just thrown had been the biggest he had ever thrown in a controlled environment, and where every other 16-year-old on the planet would have been in a hospital. He sat down. He sat down hard. Aizawa unzipped the sleeping bag enough to get his arm out and pointed at the front of the room. "My name is Aizawa. I will be your homeroom teacher. The lazy ones among you will be expelled by the end of this month. The serious ones will leave this school in 3 years and become heroes with me, lying about how easy you were to work with. Get into your gym uniforms. We are going outside to test what you can do. Walk." The class stood up. Aizawa's red eyes flicked across the room. They landed on Izuku for a second longer than the rest. They moved on. Izuku slid the cigar from behind his ear, considered it, and put it back. He stood up. He went outside with the rest of them. The first day of his life as a hero student had begun. He survived the first month at UA by giving the school what it asked for and nothing more. The gym tests, the academic tests, the licensing prep, he completed them. He scored where he scored. He stood in the back of the classroom when he could and at the front when he had to, and he watched. He watched the school. He smelled it. He listened to its heartbeat. He learned his classmates by their scents. Ida smelled of starched cotton and mint. He woke up at 4 in the morning, and his sweat carried the trace of the discipline he poured into every day. Uraraka smelled of warm bread and a cheap soap her mother sent her in care packages. Underneath those smells, the trace of a girl who was very tired and also very brave, and refusing to admit either out loud. Todoroki smelled of cold air, ash, and a laundry detergent his sister bought for him because his father had yet to learn how to do laundry. Underneath those, the smell of a wound that was older than the wound on his face. Bakugo smelled of nitroglycerin sweat and protein powder, and an anger that was older than his quirk. Kirishima smelled of red, simple honesty. Yaoyorozu smelled of expensive paper and a tightness in the spine that Izuku knew from his own bones, the tightness of someone who had been told her whole life that she was special and was working very hard to be worth the word. Asui smelled of pond water and the cleanest mind in the room. Aizawa smelled of cigarettes and 4 cups of black coffee a day, and a healing factor of his own that ran on willpower instead of biology. He liked them. He liked them in a way that surprised him. He had been alone for so long that the closeness of other people was a new kind of pressure. They wanted things from him. They wanted him to come to lunch with them. Then they wanted him to spar with them on the training grounds. They wanted him to laugh at their jokes. He gave them what he could. He sat at lunch with Kirishima. He sparred with Ida. He let Kaminari bounce a joke off his stillness twice a day. He stayed at arm's length from all of them because arm's length was the closest distance he had been able to use with anyone since he was 10. Uraraka made it harder. She had decided in her own mind that he was lonely. She was the kind of person who saw loneliness in other people the way a bird sees a pond. She started bringing him food from the cafeteria he had skipped. She would sit down across from him and slide a plate of curry across the table and say nothing, and she would eat her own curry, and she would leave when he stood up, and she would do it again 2 days later. He let her. He let her because the boy in his head had loved a few women in 100 years, and the boy in his head said, "Let her," gently, and Izuku trusted the boy in his head about what to do with women whose softness might survive being near him. He had been at UA for 2 weeks before the press caught up with him. Some staffer at the gate had seen him without his hood and had made a phone call. The picture of him walking through the gate ran on a hero blog. The hero blog ran the connection. The boy in the picture had been seen at 3 different underground fight circuits across the country. Within 48 hours, the hero gossip channels were running a name they had given him, the Black Tag. He hated the name on first hearing. He kept hating it. The school's PR department came to him. They wanted a name. He gave them a look. They wanted a costume. He showed them the leather jacket and the white tank top and the dog tags. They wanted to know if he had a hero name in mind. Wolverine. They stared at him. Wolverine? Wolverine, bub. They wrote it down. The name ran. The school issued a press release. Class 1A had its first scandal. A student had been a known underground brawler before admission, and the public reaction was something out of an electrical storm. Half the country wanted him expelled. The other half wanted him on a magazine cover. The hero ranking sites started doing pre-debut speculation. The pundits on television argued for 45 minutes a night about whether the school was right to have admitted him. Izuku watched the news once. He turned it off. He went out to the training ground and put a hole through a steel target that Cementos had told him was the densest training material in the school. He went back to his dorm. That was where he was 2 weeks later when the trip to USJ was announced. The bus ride to the USJ was the loudest part of his week. The class sat in 2 rows of seats. Kaminari was telling a story. Kirishima was laughing. Asui was on her phone. Ida was upright in the front, looking at the road for safety reasons that the rest of the class had stopped questioning. Izuku sat at the back next to a window. Uraraka sat down across from him without asking. She had a book in her hand. She opened it. She made any attempt to make him talk vanish. She read for the entire trip. Every once in a while, she would look up at the window with him, then back at her book. The boy in his head said, gently again, "Let her." The bus pulled into the USJ parking lot. 13, the rescue hero, met them at the door of the dome with their familiar, oversized spacesuit and their small, kind voice. Aizawa stood next to them in a yellow sleeping bag he had only half unzipped. The class lined up. Izuku stepped through the door. His nose hit something he had been waiting for since he was 11. It was faint. It was at the far end of the dome. It was underneath the sense of 40 other hero students and 3 pro heroes, and the chlorine of the flood zone, and the hot rubber of the rescue mats. It was a single specific smell that came from one specific place in his memory. It was the smell of a laboratory. It was Garaki's work. "Aizawa," Izuku said, low. Aizawa heard him. The man's red eyes flicked to him. "Something's here." Aizawa was already turning when the air in the center of the USJ tore open. A black mist gate opened. A man with messy blue hair and a hand on his face stepped out. Behind him, more came. 20, 40, 60 villains. They poured into the USJ, like ink into water. The students backed up. Ida started shouting orders. Kirishima hardened his arms. Yao Yorozu started materializing weapons. Izuku's eyes had stayed on the figure at the back of the spreading group. It was massive, black-skinned, bald. Its skull was open at the top, its bare brain visible. Its eyes had a missing center. Its teeth were a row of bone shards in a beak-shaped mouth. It stood behind Shigaraki Tomura the way a guard dog stands behind a child holding the leash, the Nomu. It smelled of Garaki. Izuku stepped forward through the line of the class. "Get behind me," Ida looked at him. "What are you?" "Behind me, bub." Ida's mouth closed. He stepped back. He pulled the others back with him. Aizawa was already moving toward the front lines, scarf rising, eyes activating, taking on the bulk of the lower-tier villains in the central plaza. Shigaraki Tomura looked across the dome at Izuku. "The new kid," he said. "Black tag. Wolverine. They told me you would be here. They sent the big one for you." Izuku looked at the Nomu. "You picked the wrong house, bub." His knuckles flexed, snicked. 6 adamantium claws extended in the recycled air of the USJ, and the dome went perfectly still. Shigaraki giggled. "Get him," he said. The Nomu came. It crossed the floor of the USJ like a freight train. It was faster than its size implied. Its first punch caught Izuku in the chest and sent him through one of the support pillars of the central plaza. The pillar exploded into pieces. He came out the other side of it in a roll, came up on his feet, and his ribs were already cracking back into place. The Nomu came after him. Its second punch hit the side of his head. His scalp opened. The skin tore from his temple to his crown. The adamantium gleamed under the laceration for half a second before the healing factor caught it and pulled the skin shut. He felt the class watching. He had a half second to register it. He saw their faces. Uraraka's hand was over her mouth. Ida was perfectly still. Todoroki was watching with a face that wasn't the face he usually wore. Bakugo was staring like a man who had been told a thing he had refused to believe and was now seeing it happen. The Nomu's third punch hit him in the chest. He went through another pillar. He came up. He went forward. He took the Nomu by its upper arm as it threw a fourth punch, slipped under it, and put his right-hand claws through its bicep. The claws went in. They came out the other side. The Nomu seemed to register the wound only enough to register it. Its shock absorption quirk distributed the damage. The wound closed itself with the same flat regeneration that had been built into it on a laboratory table that Izuku could see in his head, a table he had been on once, a table that smelled like this thing did now. The smell broke something in him. It was the smell of his own violation grafted onto another creature's body. Garaki had reused the technique, the same hands, the same procedure, the same cooked flesh under the closed skin. Garaki had taken what he had done to Izuku Midoriya in that mountain laboratory 5 years ago, refined it, and sold it to a man in a coat with a face on it. The berserker rage came up out of his marrow. It came up the way a tide comes up. The boy in his head stepped back. Logan stepped back. The animal that lived under both of them came forward. There was no thought in him after that. There was no language. There was the smell of his mother's blood. There was the smell of his own blood as it had run out of him at age 11 in a containment tank. There was the smell of this thing in front of him that had been made by the same hands that had made his bones into what they were. He went into the Nomu like a wood chipper goes into a tree. The first slash opened the Nomu from collarbone to hip. The wound closed. He hit it again. The wound closed again. He climbed it. He climbed the Nomu the way a soldier climbs an obstacle, one set of claws above the other, and the Nomu's hands beat at him as he went up. One of its blows caught him in the spine and broke 3 vertebrae, and his lower body went numb for a second before the healing factor pulled the bones back into alignment. And he kept climbing. He got to the Nomu's head. The skull was open at the top. The brain was visible. He had seen this in dreams. He had seen it on a chart on a wall in a laboratory. He went down with the claws into the brain. The Nomu's regeneration tried to close the wound around the metal. He held the metal there. He pressed down. He held. The Nomu thrashed. Its hand caught his leg. Its grip cracked his femur in 2 places. He held. He pushed deeper. The Nomu's other hand came up and caught his shoulder and tore his arm half off at the joint. The muscle ripping, the tendons giving, and his shoulder dislocated, and he held. Because Logan's lessons in 100 years had been one lesson over and over, and the lesson was hold. He held. The Nomu's regeneration ran out of the speed it needed. The brain damage spread faster than the closing. The Nomu staggered. Its grip on his leg went slack. Its other hand fell off his shoulder. It tipped sideways. He rode it down. He was on top of it as it hit the floor, and he was already moving the claws to the next spot, the tendons at the base of the skull, the shock absorption channels Garaki had built into the bioengineered neck. He sliced. He sliced. He sliced. The Nomu's head came off. It rolled 3 meters and stopped. The body went still. He stood up. He was covered in blood. Most of it was the Nomu's. Some of it was his. His shoulder was rebuilding itself in front of his eyes. His leg was straightening. His scalp was sealing back across his crown. He was breathing through his teeth. His eyes were the eyes of an animal that had just finished feeding. The dome was silent. Somewhere across it, Aizawa was holding off the rest of the villains. Kirishima had gone hard and was holding a position. Ida had run out a back door to fetch the other pros. Yaoyorozu was at the center of a small defensive circle she had built out of materialized steel. Shigaraki Tomura was staring at Izuku. His hand had drifted up to scratch his neck. "He killed it," Shigaraki said. He sounded like a child who had been told a thing he had been certain about, and the certainty had been pulled out of his hands and broken in front of him. He killed the anti-symbol. He just killed the anti-symbol. Izuku stared back at him across the body of the Nomu. The animal in him was still up. He started walking toward Shigaraki. A black mist gate opened between them. "Tomura," the warp gate villain said, with the careful voice of a butler who had identified an incoming carpet stain. "We must withdraw. The pros are arriving." Shigaraki kept staring at Izuku. "Who made you?" he said. Izuku stopped walking. He let the question settle in him. "The same man who made that," he said. He pointed at the Nomu's body with one clawed hand. "And when I find him, you are going to want to be standing very, very far away." Shigaraki's hand stayed at his neck. The warp gate enveloped him. He was gone. His villains were gone with him, pulled through the mist in chunks. The dome emptied of them in less than 10 seconds. Izuku stood there in the wreckage. The class came out from cover. Uraraka was first. She walked toward him like a person walks toward the edge of a cliff. She stopped 2 meters away. Her eyes went over him. The closing wounds, the shoulder pulling itself back into place, the dog tags shining in the dim light. Her mouth was still half open from the gasp she had put behind her hand earlier. He looked at her. He flexed his hand, the claws slid back in. The blood came off the metal as it retracted, and his knuckles closed over the gaps. Uraraka took a breath. "Are you okay?" she said. He looked at her. For a long second, he had no answer that fit in a teenager's mouth. "Yeah," he said. She nodded, the way people nod when they have been told a thing that they understand will be true on the surface and will need to be unpacked layer by layer later. Ida came up beside her. His hands were behind his back. He was struggling with himself. He was a young man who lived for rules and who had just watched a classmate commit something that the rules failed to cover. He looked at Izuku. He looked at the body of the Nomu. "Midoriya-san," he said. "You saved?" "Don't," Izuku said. Ida stopped. "Don't say I saved anyone, bub. I killed something. There's a difference." Ida's mouth closed. He looked at Izuku for a long moment. Then he bowed. He bowed lower than he usually bowed, lower than the school taught its students to bow at adults. He held the bow. When he straightened, his eyes were wet, and Izuku looked away from him, because Ida Tenya bowing like that to him was a thing he could only handle from a side angle. Todoroki came up. He stopped where Ida and Uraraka were standing. He stayed silent. He looked at Izuku for a long time. His mismatched eyes did the thing they did when he was thinking. They went from Izuku's hands to Izuku's face to the body of the Nomu to the burn-flecked floor and back to Izuku's face. He held Izuku's eyes for a count. "You are going to be in the sports festival," he said. "Yeah." "I will see you there." "Yeah." That was the conversation. Bakugo came up last. He came up the way he came up to everything, with his hands in his pockets and his teeth showing. He stopped a meter from Izuku. He looked at the Nomu body. He looked at the blood drying on Izuku's tank top. He looked at Izuku. "You are not better than me," he said. Izuku looked at him. "Bub," he said, "I am a lot of things. Better than you isn't a thing I'm trying to be. Pick a smaller fight." Bakugo's hands moved in his pockets. He turned around. He walked away. The pros came in through the front door of the USJ behind All Might, who slowed down at the sight of the dead Nomu and the boy standing over it, and who looked across the dome and met Aizawa's eyes, and who said nothing about it for a long time afterwards. That night, the news had it. The video of the Nomu fight was on every screen in Japan by morning. The school had nowhere else to go. Security cameras had run and the footage had leaked, and the footage was unedited. The country woke up to a new face on every channel. A boy in a leather jacket and a white tank top with a gleaming spine of metal under torn flesh, taking an apex predator engineered by an unknown laboratory and tearing it apart with his hands. The hero rankings had a new entry. Wolverine. 16 years old. Provisional rank undetermined. Public reaction, terrified. The USJ attack changed the school. Some of the change was useful. The class started training harder. The teachers stopped pretending the year would be ordinary. Aizawa started running the class through ambush drills that made Ida's eyes shine. Some of the change was less useful. Reporters ran the gate every morning. Hero gossip channels ran daily speculation about whether Wolverine was a hero or a Black Ops asset on loan. Politicians ran their mouths. 2 prefectural governors gave speeches about hero accountability. A talk show host accused the school of harboring an unstable weapon. A counter talk show host accused the first talk show host of cowardice. The country split clean along the line of whether the boy who had killed the Nomu was a savior or a problem. And the boy who had done it ate his cafeteria curry through it all and refused to give a single interview. All Might came to him a week after the USJT. The pro hero was in his slimmer form, the one Izuku had smelled on the man across the dome and registered the sickness of. He sat down across from Izuku in an empty classroom after school. He looked at the boy for a long time. "Young Midoriya," he said, "I have been a hero for a long time." Izuku met his eyes. "I have seen many fighters," All Might said. "I have seen warriors. I have seen men who cared about nothing. I have seen men who cared about everything and lost their way. I have not seen a child who fights the way you fight." Izuku waited. "I want to ask you a question. You are 16. You move like a man my age. Where did you learn to fight?" Izuku looked at the floor. He thought about it for a long count. "Everywhere," he said. "Tell me one place." A basement under a ramen shop in Osaka. A man with a glass quirk threw a pane through my face. The pane went through my head and out the other side. He was so surprised that he stopped throwing. I broke his jaw. The crowd kept silent for a full minute. I left before they finished counting the money. All Might closed his eyes. He opened them. How old were you? 13. Where was your mother? The room got a little colder. Izuku looked at him. In the ground, bub. All Might held his eyes. He bowed his head. He sat for a long count without speaking. When he raised his head, he had something in his face that hadn't been there before. I have been failing children for a long time, he said. Izuku looked at him. He let the man have the moment. I will fail you less, All Might said, if you allow it. Izuku considered him. He considered the man. He considered the smell of cancer and old smoke and something at the back of All Might's throat that was a wound a long way down. All right, bub, Izuku said. That was the conversation. After that, All Might came once a week to the rooftop where Aizawa met Izuku, and Izuku had 2 teachers instead of 1. All Might had no notepad. He brought stories. He told Izuku about old fights, old heroes, old failures of his own. He told him about a man he had killed in America. He told him about a woman he had loved and lost. He told him about being scared and about being old and about going slower than he used to. Izuku listened. He listened the way a man listens to another man when they have both lived several lifetimes, and they are just figuring out that the other one has too. Aizawa caught him outside the dorms one night. Aizawa lit a cigarette. Izuku lit a cigar. They stood under a low awning while the spring rain came down in the courtyard. They are going to want to make an example of you at the sports festival, Aizawa said. All right. They are going to push you, the crowd, the pundits, the students. There will be an effort to make you lose, to prove you are beatable. The school can't stop it. The school doesn't want to stop it. They want to know who you are when somebody tries. All right. You are going to draw fire. All right. Aizawa took a drag. The orange ember pulled at the rain. Try not to kill anyone, kid. Izuku took a drag of his cigar. The smoke curled out of his mouth and went up into the drizzle. Samurai, soldier, ronin, savage, he said. I've been called them all, bub. None of them stuck. Hero is just another word. Aizawa looked at him sideways for a long count. I knew there was a reason I picked you up off the docks, he said. He flicked his cigarette out into the rain. He went back inside. Izuku stood there and finished his cigar. The sports festival was 3 weeks away. The sports festival opened with a stadium full of 45,000 people screaming the school's name. The first event was the obstacle race. The students poured out of the tunnel of the stadium in a sprint. Bakugo took an early lead with a jet of explosions. Todoroki took his own lead on a wave of ice that he froze in the path of the rest of the runners. Ida went up the middle on the engines in his calves. Izuku came out of the tunnel last. He had been at the back of the crowd because he had been finishing a sandwich. He watched the others sprint. He watched Todoroki freeze the floor. He watched Bakugo blow past Todoroki on a column of flame. He started walking. He walked the obstacle race. He walked it through the giant robot zone, where he caught a falling robotic arm with one hand and threw it sideways into another robot to knock both of them flat. He walked it through the chasm, where he jumped from one dangling platform to the next with the same flat, unhurried gait, his adamantium-loaded legs hitting the wood and sinking into the boards an extra 2 centimeters every time. He walked it through the minefield. He stepped on the mines. They went off under his boots. They blew his boots off, and then his pants, and then took strips of skin off his calves, and the camera operators stationed at the minefield kept zooming in on him because nothing on television had ever moved that slow through that much fire. He came out of the minefield in the smoke. His clothes were scorched. His skin was already healing. His pants were halfway gone. He was in 4th place. He started running. The stadium screamed. The screaming was a sound he had been away from since the basements. The basements had been smaller. The basements had been 40 people. This was 45,000. The sound rolled into the bowl of the stadium and ricocheted, and 45,000 throats said his name in the same breath. Wolverine. 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 He passed Ida at the rope bridge. He passed Todoroki at the second minefield. He came up next to Bakugo at the last 100 meters. Bakugo turned his head. His hand lit. Izuku ran past him. He crossed the finish line first. The stadium roared. Bakugo crossed it half a second later. The crowd's reaction departed from what crowds usually do. The crowd refused to cheer for him the way they had cheered for the boy with the explosions, or the boy with the ice, or the boy with the engines. The crowd made a sound at him that lay somewhere between admiration and fear, and the sound was loud, and the sound followed him all the way back to his bench in the holding area, where he sat down and lit a cigar. He sat there. He smoked. Present Mike was screaming something into a microphone above him. Midnight was on the field starting the second event. He half listened. He won the second event. He half listened to the third event. He won the third event. The crowd's sound for him changed each time. The first reaction had been fear. The second had been awe. The third was something he had no name for, a sound that was loud and hushed at the same time, the sound of 45,000 people watching one person take the world stage and refuse to perform on it. He won his way into the final round. The final round was one-on-one bouts. The bracket put him through 4 matches. The first match was a third year. He won in 9 seconds. The second match was a second year. He won in 12 seconds. The third match was Bakugo Katsuki. The fight was loud. Bakugo came in screaming. Bakugo threw the largest set of blasts he had ever thrown in his life. Bakugo's body was at the limits of what it could output in a short window. The arena floor turned into a furnace. The stadium roared. Izuku walked through it. He took every blast. He absorbed the heat. His skin charred. His healing factor labored. He kept walking. He reached Bakugo. He grabbed Bakugo's wrists. He held them up over his head, and Bakugo's hands kept going off, and the explosions broke around them like water around a stone. Bakugo's eyes were huge and red and burning. He was screaming a sound that fell short of being a word. Izuku lifted him off the ground. He held him up there. He looked at Bakugo's face. For a single second, he saw a small boy he had never met. A boy who had been standing in a kindergarten classroom on the first day of school, screaming because someone had taken his marker. The smallness of Bakugo was a thing Izuku had refused to see since the first day of class. He saw it now. He saw the kid behind the rage. He saw a kid who had been told his whole life that he was the best, and who had run into a person in a leather jacket who had made the word best a word he no longer owned. He set Bakugo down. He let go of his wrists. Bakugo was breathing through his teeth. Izuku stepped back. He bowed. Half a bow, the bow of one fighter to another. "I'll see you in 2 years," he said, "when you're ready." He walked out of the ring. The judge raised his hand. The bout was over. Bakugo stayed in the ring for a long time. When he finally walked out, he refused to look at Izuku. He gave him silence for a week after that. The fourth match was Todoroki Shoto. The fourth match was the final. Todoroki was waiting for him when he came out of the tunnel. The sun had come down behind the stadium. The arena lights were on. The crowd was on its feet. The two of them faced each other across the white circle. Todoroki's right side glittered with a fresh layer of frost. His left side was bare. The scar around his eye, the same heavy mark it had always been. Midnight stood between them. She raised her hand. She dropped it. Todoroki's right side fired. A glacier came at Izuku in a wave of ice and shrapnel. It was the largest single ice attack the country had ever seen at a school sports festival. The crowd inhaled. The glacier filled the arena in a heartbeat. It roared toward Izuku in a moving wall as tall as the stadium roof. Izuku met it with his shoulder. The ice swallowed him. It pushed him back. It piled around him. Spikes of ice grew out of the floor of the arena and went through his stomach and his shoulders. 3 of them, big as a man's leg, jutting out of his back. His feet left the ground. The ice carried him into the wall of the arena. He hit the wall. The spikes that had gone through him pinned him there. He hung on the wall of the arena. The crowd went silent. He was 3 stories up. The ice held him. His blood ran down the wall of the stadium. The healing factor was working hard. The wounds around the ice columns refused to close because the ice was still in them. He looked down at Todoroki. Todoroki was staring up at him from across the arena floor. The boy's face was as still as it had ever been. He was breathing hard. He had yet to move. Izuku put his hands on the ice column going through his stomach. He pulled. The ice ground against the wound. The wound widened. He pulled harder. He tore himself off the column. The other 2 columns came out of him as he dropped, and he came down in a fall from 3 stories with his guts open to the air and his shoulders streaming red. He hit the arena floor on his feet. The impact cracked the floor in a circle around his boots. His healing factor pulled the wounds closed. The blood steamed on the cold concrete. He looked at Todoroki. He started walking. Todoroki's right side fired again. Another wave of ice. Izuku raised one arm. He took the wave on his forearm. The ice shattered against the arm because the arm had adamantium in it, and the adamantium gave nothing back. He kept walking. Todoroki sent more ice. Spikes grew out of the floor at Izuku's feet. They came up at his heart, his throat, his face. He took 2 of them through the chest. He pulled them out as he walked. He left a trail of blood across the white circle of the arena floor. He stopped a meter from Todoroki. He looked at the boy. He saw the half of him that was ice. He saw the half of him that was fire. He saw the burn around the left eye. He saw the way Todoroki's right hand was the hand he led with, and he saw the way Todoroki's left hand was the hand Todoroki refused to use. He smelled the scar on Todoroki's face. The scar smelled of an old kettle of water that a small child had pulled from a stove at the age of 5, and he smelled the woman's grief in the scar tissue, and he smelled the father's ambition baked into the boy's bones, and he smelled the choice the boy had made in his head years ago to refuse to be his father by leaving half of himself unused. He understood it in a breath. He understood it because he had spent 100 years refusing to be the man who had cooked his own bones into metal. He looked at Todoroki. "You are using half of yourself," he said. Todoroki's mismatched eyes flickered. "Do not lecture me." "Lecture isn't a thing I'm doing, kid. I'm reading you. Your fire is your father. Your ice is your mother. You decided when you were 12 you would never use the fire because your father would win if you did. You think every time you keep the fire down, you keep her safe. She's safe, kid. She's safe in your head. She told you to use what was yours. You are choosing to lose this fight to keep a promise to a woman who never asked you to make it." Todoroki's right hand came up. Another glacier took shape over Izuku's head. It dropped. It fell on him like the side of a mountain. It buried him. Izuku's voice came up out of the ice. "Nature made me a freak. Man made me a weapon, and God made it last too long." A pause. A crack. The ice fissured. "You think you know pain, kid? You think the half of you that you refuse to use is pain? Burn me. Show me what you're made of." The ice broke. Izuku came up out of it. He was a wreck. His skin was blue. His chest was open in 3 places. His face was streaked with blood from a wound at his hairline. He was steaming all over because the healing factor was running at max, fighting frostbite and blood loss and the lingering damage from the spikes that had been through him at the start. He took one step. Todoroki stared at him. In Todoroki's mismatched eyes, something cracked. It wasn't the part of him that was ice. It was the part of him that was a child who had been hit by his father with the back of a hand for crying after his mother had been taken away. It was the part of him that had been told he was to be the man who killed All Might. It was the part of him that had sat in a hospital room at age 6, looking at a woman with a bandage around her eye, and had told her in a voice that could have cracked diamonds that he was sorry and that he would never be his father, ever. Never, no matter what he had to give up. Izuku's words went into all of those parts at once. The part that was a child looked up. The part that was a child decided to come out and play. Todoroki's left side ignited. The fire was a column. It was the biggest fire that had ever been thrown by a 16-year-old in a school stadium. It was the boy choosing himself for the first time since he had been 5 years old. It came out of him in a wave that warped the air for 10 meters in every direction. The spectators in the front felt it. It hit Izuku. Izuku walked into it. His clothes burned off in 3 steps. His skin caught fire. His tank top went up. His jacket, which he had taken to wearing for the festival because the school had told him to, went up. The cigar in his pocket burned to ash. The dog tags around his neck glowed white hot and stayed where they were because adamantium alloy refused to surrender to anything but stars. He kept walking. His skin blackened. The healing factor labored. It worked at a rate Izuku had never asked it to work at. It pulled the dead skin off and pushed new skin up underneath in a continuous flow. and the heat of the fire kept tearing the new skin off as fast as the old skin came off, and his nerves screamed every nerve they had into his head at the same time. He kept walking. The crowd was silent. 45,000 people watched a teenager walk through a column of fire. The entire country watched on every screen, in every home, in every bar. The networks would later say it was the most watched 10 seconds of programming in Japanese television history. He reached Todoroki. He grabbed Todoroki's collar with one burning hand. He looked at the boy's face. For a single second, Todoroki saw something in Izuku's eyes that wasn't the animal, and wasn't Logan, and wasn't Wolverine. It was an older man. It was a man who had loved women and lost them. It was a man who had been a soldier in wars Todoroki would never read about in a book. It was a man who had been wiped 100 times and who had come back every time. It was a man who had made peace with the fact that he would never get to die, and who was looking at Todoroki the way an old man looks at a young man who is choosing to live for the first time. The look held. Izuku headbutted him. The headbutt was clean. It was the front of his skull into the front of Todoroki's, the adamantium-laced front of his skull. Todoroki's nose broke. His vision spun. His knees gave. He went down. The fire around them died. Izuku stood there. He was a wreck of healing burns. His tank top was ash. His jacket was ash. The dog tags hung against his bare chest, smoking. His skin was pulling itself together in long red sheets across his torso. His pants had burned off most of the way. He was, for all useful purposes, naked in the middle of the arena, except that the body he was naked in was a body that any person who saw it would carry with them for years. The crowd stayed silent for a full beat. Then it broke. It broke into a sound that fell short of a cheer. It was the sound that crowds make when they have been shown a thing they have any language for. It was a sound that started small in one section and spread across the entire stadium in a wave. And by the time the wave came back around to the start, it had become a roar. Izuku gave the crowd no attention. He looked at Todoroki. The boy was on his back. His left side was still warm. His right side was still ringed with frost. His mismatched eyes were open. Izuku crouched down. He put a hand on Todoroki's shoulder. "Come find me when you decide to use both sides," he said. "I'll fight you again. I'll see what you can do." Todoroki's eyes filled. He stayed silent. Izuku stood up. He walked to the edge of the arena. He sat down on the steps that led up to the holding area. He pulled the cigar from behind his ear that he had moved to a different pocket before the bout, a fresh one, miraculously intact, and he lit it with a match he had also kept in a pocket below the burn line of his pants. He took a draw. He let the smoke out. The crowd kept making the sound. Midnight came across the arena. She raised his hand over his head. She declared him the winner. He kept his eyes off the crowd. He looked at the steps. The cameras held on him for a long time. The country looked at him. The country looked at him on its screens, in its bars, in its homes, in its kitchens. A man in his 40s in a small apartment in Hokkaido leaned back in a kitchen chair, and his cigarette burned down to the filter while he stared at the screen, and he said to no one in the room, "That kid has lived a long time, hasn't he?" His wife asked him what he meant. He said he had little idea. He said the kid in the leather jacket had a face you only got after you had been through several lifetimes. And he said the kid had walked through fire that should have killed 3 men in a row. And he said the kid had bowed to a younger fighter who he had beaten. And he said all of that meant the country had a new kind of person on its hands. And he said he had no answer to whether that was a hero or a problem. But he said either way, the boy would be on a screen in front of them every night for a year. His wife asked what his name was. He said the boy had 3 names. He said the school called him Midoriya. He said the rankings called him Wolverine. He said the streets called him the Black Tag. He said, pick the one you can stand to look at. She looked at the screen. She watched the boy sit on the steps with his cigar. "Midoriya," she said after a while. "All right," her husband said. He turned the television off. Outside the stadium, in a rented apartment 6 kilometers south of UA High School, Dr. Kyudai Garaki sat in front of his own television with a cup of green tea cooling in his hand and watched the boy he had built walk through a column of fire to teach a lesson to another child. His mouth was a thin line. Garaki had spent 5 years preparing to take Izuku Midoriya back. He had spent the first year designing the second procedure. He had spent the second year designing the Nomu prototype. He had spent the third and fourth and fifth years building toward the night when his weapon would walk back to him, dragged either by curiosity or by violence, and would become the instrument of his rise inside the League of Villains. The Nomu was dead. The boy had walked through the Nomu the way one walks through a curtain. Garaki set the teacup down. He picked up the phone on the table next to his chair. He dialed a number that the police of 3 countries had been trying to find for 18 years. The phone rang once. It picked up. A voice answered. It was a voice that had once belonged to a man who had been the most powerful villain in the country. Before it had been a voice that had belonged to a creature in a hospital bed. Before it had become a voice that ran on borrowed lungs and a stolen jaw. The voice was old and patient and pleased. "Kyudai," it said. "I see you have noticed the boy. He killed the prototype. I watched. He killed it well. He was supposed to be mine. He was. He still might be. Children have been turned by men more clever than you. I would suggest that you stop trying to bring him in alive." Garaki was silent for a long moment. "You want him dead?" "I want him dealt with." The two have become the same word. The boy who killed your Nomu in the USJ is the boy whose existence will, if it continues, prevent my eventual ascension. If I cannot have him, the country cannot have him either. Send the high ends. All of them. I have been saving them for the public reveal of our work. Use them now. Use them on him. Use them on the school. The boy and the school have grown into the same wound. Cut both. Garaki closed his eyes. He thought about the boy at age 4, in a small apartment with a dead villain on the bedroom wall. He thought about the boy at age 11, walking out of a wrecked containment tank, dripping amber fluid, with 6 adamantium claws gleaming in the laboratory lights. He thought about the boy in the arena tonight, walking through fire. "I will need a month," he said. "You have one," the voice said. The line went dead. Garaki set the phone down. He looked at the television. The image had cycled to a slow-motion replay of the moment the boy had walked into the fire. The networks had paused it on the moment the dog tags glowed white. The moment the boy's face emerged through the flame, the face was a face Garaki had built. It was looking at him through the screen. It was older than him. For the first time since he had been a small child himself, in a room with a man who had been older than the world, Kyudai Garaki felt the small, real animal feeling that any other small, real animal feels in the presence of something that has decided to eat it. He failed to enjoy the feeling. He stood up. He went to make a phone call to the high ends. In the holding area of UA High School, Izuku Midoriya was sitting on a bench with a towel around his waist and his cigar between his teeth. Recovery Girl was reaching up to put a salve on the worst of the still healing burns. He was letting her. Aizawa was standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame, watching. Uraraka came in. She had the duffel bag with the change of clothes the school had set aside for him. She set it on the bench beside him. Her eyes were red. She had been crying somewhere. She did anything but try to hide it. She sat down next to him. She looked at the floor. "That was the worst thing I have ever seen," she said. He looked at her sideways. "I'm sorry," he said. She made a sound that was half a laugh and half something else. "That isn't what I want." He let her have a long minute. Recovery Girl finished. She left with a small huff at Aizawa about overgrown teenagers and how their nervous systems were going to send them all to early graves. Aizawa stayed in the doorway. Uraraka kept looking at the floor. "Why do you keep fighting?" she asked. He took the cigar out of his mouth. He looked at the wall. He looked at his hands. He looked at the dog tags around his neck, still warm from the fire. He thought about Inko in a kitchen 6 years ago and 100 years. He thought about the way her hand had felt in his when he was 4 years old. He thought about the way her hand had felt in his when he was 10, and the rain had been coming down on her face. He thought about the way the smell of her had stayed with him through every fight in every basement and every room with a steel chair and every winter morning on a frozen ridge. He looked at Uraraka. "I fight," he said, "because if I stop, I forget." She looked up. She held his eyes. She said nothing. She put her hand on his hand. She kept it there. Aizawa in the doorway looked at the ceiling for a long count, and then he went out into the hall and closed the door behind him, with a softness Izuku heard through the wood and said nothing about. Uraraka's hand was warm. He let it be warm. For a single minute in a holding area at the end of a sports festival in a country that was about to be tested in a way it had never been tested before, the boy who had walked through fire and the girl who had been bringing him curry sat on a bench together and held a hand between them. And the boy in his head, Logan, ancient and tired and seasoned by 100 years of women he had loved and lost, said very softly, "Let her." He let her. That night in the dorm, he lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling. He could smell the school. He could smell the city. Somewhere in the city, Gurki was on a phone. Somewhere in the city, the high-ends were waking up. Somewhere in the city, a man in a hospital bed was breathing through a respirator that was a knife pointed at the throat of every living thing in the country. He could smell the boy in his head. The boy in his head was sharpening himself. The boy in his head was getting ready. Izuku lay there. He flexed his right hand. He did it slowly, so the claws came out one at a time. Snicked. 1. Snicked. 2. Snicked. 3. He looked at the metal in the dim light from the window. The adamantium caught the street lamp glow and held it. He thought about Inko. He thought about Garaki. He thought about the high-ends and the school and Uraraka's hand and Todoroki's tears and Bakugo's silence, and Aizawa's tired red eyes in the doorway, and the country watching him on every screen. He thought about the boy who had been 4 years old, standing in a small bedroom with 3 bone claws in his hands and his mother's blood in the air. He flexed his hand back. The claws slid in. He closed his eyes. In the silence of the dorm, he said one thing into the room that nobody else could hear. "All right, bub." He went to sleep. Outside the school, in a warehouse on the edge of the bay, had the first of the high ends opened its eyes. It was 9 feet tall. It had 4 arms. It had a brain that had been shaped over 6 months from the same procedure that had made the USJ Nomu refined, stronger, with shock absorption that had been redesigned to specifically counter adamantium cutting. It looked at Garaki across the laboratory. Garaki was holding a clipboard. The high end's mouth opened. A voice came out of it. "Where," it said, "is the boy?" Garaki smiled. "He is at school," he said. "We will go and pick him up." The high-end's mouth closed. It stood up out of the table. The lights in the laboratory flickered. In the dorm at UA, 6 kilometers north, Izuku Midoriya opened his eyes for a second in his sleep, and his nose flared. And somewhere at the back of his sleeping mind, the boy in his head sat up. He smelled it. He smelled the new thing in the city. He smelled what was coming. The corner of his mouth lifted in his sleep into something that fell short of a smile. He turned over. He went back into the dream. The dream was of an alley in the rain. In the dream, his mother's hand was warm. He woke up at 1:57 in the morning. The dream was still on him when his eyes opened. He held it for a beat. Then he let it go, because the room was telling him something the dream had been telling him also in a softer voice, and the room's voice was louder. The wind had shifted off the bay. He could smell the warehouse on it. The smell had moved. The smell was closer. He sat up. He swung his legs off the bed. His feet found the floor without a sound. He pulled the white tank top down over his ribs. He pulled the sweatpants up at the waist. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He looked at the thin line of street lamp glow under the curtain and listened to the school the way a man listens to a forest at dusk. And he heard everything in it that was sleeping and everything in it that was awake. And he heard a thing on the perimeter fence that had a heartbeat and a respiration cycle and a smell that was the smell of the Nomu in the USJ, refined. There were 4 of them, 3 on the perimeter, 1 already inside the wall. He flexed his hand, snicked. 3 claws came up out of his right knuckles in the dark of the dorm room. The metal caught the street lamp glow and held it the way water holds the moon. He looked at them for 1 breath. He let the breath out. He pulled the claws back in with a soft mechanical kiss and went out the window. He went over the side of the dorm and down the wall in a controlled fall that ended with his bare feet on the wet grass of the courtyard. The rain had started an hour ago and was still coming down in the slow, fine way that rain comes down in early spring. He went across the courtyard. He went past the front of the school. He cleared the corner of the main building and saw the first one. It was 9 feet tall. It was bald and black-skinned, and the top of its skull was open, but the brain inside the skull had a layer of bone armor over it that the USJ one had failed to have. It had 4 arms. 2 of the arms were the size of a man's torso. The other 2 were smaller and ended in hooks instead of hands. It was standing in the center of the training ground with its head tilted to one side, listening. And the smell rolling off it was the smell of Garaki's laboratory in the mountains, the smell of the warehouse on the bay, the smell of every wrong night Izuku Midoriya had ever lived through. It turned its head and saw him. Its mouth opened. "The boy," it said. The voice came out of a throat that had been built to talk and had not been built to talk well, but the word was clear. "The boy is here." Izuku flexed both hands. Snicked. Snicked. 6 claws extended in the wet dark. "You picked the wrong house, bub." The high end came at him. It crossed the training ground in 3 strides. Its first punch was the size of a cinder block and came down in a hammer arc at his head. He moved his head 1 inch. The fist went past his ear and into the asphalt of the training ground, and the asphalt cratered in a 6-foot circle around the impact. He brought his right-hand claws up under the nearest forearm and went through the wrist and into the elbow on a single push. The hand came off. The smaller hook arm on the same side came down at his shoulder, and he caught the hook on his left forearm and let the metal in his arm take the strike, and the hook glanced off the adamantium under his skin and skittered off into the dark. He went up the high end. He climbed the body the way he had climbed the USJ Nomu, 1 set of claws above the other, except the USJ Nomu had been a target, and this thing was a trap. The flesh he sank his claws into clamped down. The muscle gripped the metal. The body had been built to hold his hands inside it once they went in, and he felt the grip the second he tried to pull the claws back to climb higher. The grip was not regeneration. It was design. The high end had been designed to make him stay where he stuck. He set his feet against the ribs and tore his left hand out. The muscle held. The muscle came with the claws. A long red rope of tissue came out of the body, and Izuku tore it free of the body's grip, and the high end screamed the way a furnace screams when a door is opened on it, and he kept climbing. The other 3 came over the wall. He felt them before he saw them. 3 impacts on the perimeter, 3 sets of feet hitting the courtyard, 3 new respirations in the air. He was halfway up the first one. He had 30 seconds before the others reached him, and the math of his night ran through his head while he climbed. The dormitory alarm went off. It went off late. It went off because some sensor on the perimeter wall had finally registered 3 9-foot creatures going over it and had passed the information up a chain that ended at a small panel on the wall of the staff room, and the panel had lit up and a klaxon had started. The dorm windows began to light up one by one. Faces appeared at the glass. Ida's face. Yaoyorozu's face. Kirishima already in his hardened form and out the door before the second yellow window came on. Izuku reached the high end's head. He went into the brain through the side of the temple. The bone armor was real. The claws went through it the way they went through everything. The brain underneath the armor was less protected. He cut. He twisted. He cut. The high end staggered. Its remaining arms came up to grab him, and one of them caught his leg, and the grip was a vice. He felt his femur crack. He kept cutting. The high end went down on one knee. Its eyes rolled up. He went deeper. He found the brainstem. He severed it. The high end collapsed. He wrote it down. He came off the body before it hit the ground, and he was already turning, already counting the other 3, already smelling where they had spread to. One was at the dorm, one was at the main gate, one was coming up behind him, and it was the fastest of the 4. He turned in time to take its first punch in the chest. The punch was the size of a man, and it lifted him off his feet and sent him through the outer wall of the equipment storage shed beyond the training ground. He went through the wall. He went through a rack of weight bars. He went through the back wall of the shed and out into the gravel lot beyond it. He hit a chain link fence. The fence held. He came down on his knees in the gravel. His ribs were a column of broken glass. He breathed through his teeth. The healing factor was already working. Bone reset. Skin closed. He stood up. He picked up a weight bar that had come through the wall with him. The bar was steel, and it weighed 40 kilos, and it was the closest thing to a club that the gravel lot had to offer, and he had been using clubs for 100 years. He came back through the hole in the wall. The high end was on the other side. Its mouth opened to ask the same question the first one had asked. He brought the bar around in a two-handed swing and put the bar through the side of the thing's jaw, and the jaw came off the bone and went sideways, and he stepped past the ruined face and brought the bar down on the back of the skull, and the skull caved. The healing tried. The healing failed against the second strike. The third strike opened the skull cavity, and he dropped the bar and went in with the claws, the way he had with the first one, and he found the brainstem and ended it. That was 2. He was bleeding from the chest where the punch had cracked him. His sweatpants were torn at the knee. The white tank top was a red rag. He could hear the dorm alarm. He could hear the third high end at the dorm. He started running. He came across the training ground at a dead sprint. The third high end was at the front of the dorm. It had punched through the front entrance. It had picked up the door and thrown it across the courtyard. Yaoyorozu was inside the foyer, materializing a riot shield, and Kirishima was in front of her with his arms hardened, taking the high end's first hit and going down under it with a sound that came out of him in 3 syllables. Izuku hit the high end from behind. He came in low, he went up the back of the legs, he cut both hamstrings on the way up. The high end's knees gave. It came down. He went up the spine. He cut every muscle attachment on the way. The high end's arms fell off the shoulder joints. He reached the head. He went in the back of the skull. He found what he needed. He came out. That was 3. Kirishima was looking up at him from the floor of the foyer. His arms were in pieces. His face was unhurt. He was breathing. "Stay down," Izuku said. He turned and went back out into the courtyard. The 4th one was at the gate. The gate had been ripped off its hinges. The 4th one had come into the school grounds proper and was standing at the center of the front lawn, looking at the dorm, looking at the school, looking at the boy crossing the lawn toward it with a weight bar in one hand and 6 claws extended on the other. Aizawa was already there. He had come from the direction of the staff dorm. He had been awake when the alarm went because Aizawa was always awake. He had brought his capture weapon. Yeah, sure. His eyes were on. He had been on the high end's flank for 30 seconds when Izuku came through the gate, and he had been working it the way he worked everything, with patience, with angle, with the reading of an opponent that came from years of finding the line between underestimating a man and getting killed for it. The high end knew Aizawa was there. The high end had been built to know. Aizawa's eyes were on. The high end's regeneration was off. Aizawa had it pinned in a half circle of capture cloth and was looking for the angle to bring the cloth tight at the throat. The high end turned the wrong way. It turned away from the cloth. It turned toward Aizawa. Its movement was too fast for what Aizawa's eyes were doing. The cloth caught the wrong arm, and Aizawa, in the half second it took to redirect, blinked once. The high end's arm went through Aizawa's torso. Izuku saw it from 20 meters out. He saw the arm go in. He saw the point come out the back. He saw Aizawa's face change, which it did the way a man's face changes when he has been hit by a thing he had counted twice and missed counting once. He saw Aizawa's eyes start to close. He saw the blood come down the front of Aizawa's shirt in a sheet. He saw Aizawa fall. The thing in him that had been 4 years old in a small bedroom moved. The thing in him that had been 10 years old and moved with it. The thing in him that had been 11 years old in a wrecked containment tank moved with both of them. Logan moved last. Logan came up the way a tide comes up. Logan came up because Logan had been the floor under the floor since the day Izuku Midoriya was born, and the floor was being asked for, and the floor came. The berserker took him. There was no thought after that. There was no language. There was the high end on the lawn, and there was the boy who had been him, and there was the smell of Aizawa's blood on the wet grass, and the boy went into the high end the way a tide goes into a seawall. He dropped the weight bar. He went up the body. The body grabbed at him, and the body's grip was the same trap the first one had been, and he cut himself free of it and kept going. The body's other hand came around and caught his left arm at the elbow. It tore. The arm came off at the joint with a wet crack and a long pull, and his shoulder went red, and the high end lifted his arm in the air like a trophy, and Izuku went up the high end anyway, with one hand and 3 claws, and the other shoulder pumping blood down the side of his ribs. "One more round," he said. He said it under his breath. He said it to himself. He said it because the body had been saying it to him for 100 years, and the body refused to learn another phrase. He reached the top of the high end. The skull armor was thicker on this one. The brain was deeper. He went into the eye instead. He went in through the eye socket. He went through the soft tissue and through the back of the orbit and into the brain that way, and he twisted. The high end's grip on his torn arm went slack. The arm dropped out of the high end's hand and hit the grass beside Aizawa. He kept twisting. The high end went down. He rode it down. He rolled off it. He came up on one knee. His left side was a fountain. His vision went gray for a moment. The healing factor turned its full attention to the shoulder. Bone began to reach for bone across the gap. Marrow lifted at the ragged edge of the humerus and started pulling new bone up into the air. He looked at Aizawa. Aizawa was on his back. His chest was open. His eyes were closed. His breathing was a thin, wet sound. Izuku crossed the grass to him on his knees. He put his right hand on Aizawa's chest. He felt the heart underneath. The heart was still there. The heart was working. The wound went through the upper torso and missed the heart by 1 centimeter, and the lung was punctured and the blood was filling the chest cavity, but the heart was working. "Aizawa," he said. Aizawa's eyes failed to open. "Aizawa," he said again. The class was on the lawn now. Ida had come down from the dorm with Yaoyorozu. Yaoyorozu was already materializing a stretcher. Ura was running across the grass barefoot in pajamas. Kirishima was being carried out of the dorm foyer by Sero with one of his hardened arms still half-formed. Todoroki was at the gate. Bakugo was behind Todoroki. The class came out and saw their homeroom teacher on the wet lawn, and the boy on his knees beside the teacher with one arm gone at the elbow, bone climbing up out of the stump in slow white reaching, and they came to a halt. Ida found his voice first. "Recovery girl," he said. "Yaoyorozu," the stretch. "Sero, help me lift him. Move, move, move." They moved. They lifted Aizawa onto the stretcher. They moved him toward the medical wing. Yaoyorozu and Ida carried the stretcher together. Sero walked alongside with one hand pressing a folded cloth, also materialized, into the wound to slow the bleeding. They moved across the lawn at a run. Izuku stayed on his knees. The bone in his shoulder was halfway down to where his elbow had been. The marrow was reaching. The bone was reforming in the way bone reforms when it has adamantium in it and is laying the metal down at the same time. He could feel the metal coming up under the marrow. The metal was the slowest part. The metal had to bond as it came. He held the shoulder still and let the body work. Uraraka knelt next to him on the wet grass. She had nothing to say. She was looking at his shoulder. She was looking at his face. She had her hand on his good shoulder, and she was holding on the way a person holds on to something to make sure it stays where it is. And he failed to look at her because he was watching his own bone come back out of his body. The muscle began. The muscle laid itself across the bone in long red sheets. The muscle wrapped the new humerus. The muscle reached for the new radius and ulna. The muscle bunched at the elbow joint and built the joint. The muscle went down the forearm. The muscle laid itself across where the wrist had been. The muscle laid itself across where the hand had been. The muscle built 5 small ridges where the fingers had been. The bones came up under the muscle, climbing through it as it laid down, and the metal came up under the bones, plating them. Then the skin. The skin came up out of the meat at the shoulder and rolled down the new arm in a slow wave, and the wave reached the new wrist and the new fingers, and the fingers closed and opened, while the skin fitted itself over the knuckles and across the back of the hand and into the palm. He flexed the new hand, snicked. 3 new claws extended out of 3 new knuckles in a spray of fresh blood that the new skin was still healing around. He pulled the claws back in. He looked at the hand. He turned it over. He flexed it once more. He let it down. The 7 minutes were over. Uraraka was still holding his good shoulder. She was crying without making sound. He looked at her. He let her see him for a beat. He put his right hand over the hand she had on his shoulder. "He's alive," he said. He said it about Aizawa. He said it to her. She nodded. She failed to let go of him. Todoroki had come up while the arm was rebuilding. He was standing 2 meters away. His left side was warm. He had been warm the whole time. Izuku looked up at him. "Get him out of here," Izuku said. He meant the class. He meant the school. He meant everyone who was on the lawn and any of them who was still in the dorm. "Recovery girl is going to work on Aizawa. The school is locked down. I want the class in the safest interior room until the principal clears it." "Where are you going?" Todoroki said, "to finish this." He stood up. The new arm hung at his side, the new fingers flexed. He looked down at Uraraka. She let go of him. She stood up with him. "I am coming with you," she said. "You aren't." She held his eyes. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight the man I am going to find dies. There aren't any other people in the building. There isn't anyone for you to lift off the ground. There is just me and him and the building between us, and I want it that way." She held his eyes for another count. "All right," she said. She said it the way he said it. She had been around him long enough to learn the rhythm. He walked off the lawn. He went through the gate. He went through the front of the school grounds. He went out into the city in a torn tank top and torn sweatpants with bare feet on the wet asphalt, and the rain came down on him, and the new arm was pink at the wrist where the skin was still finishing. He found a cigar in a pocket that had survived the night. He found a match in the same pocket. He lit the cigar as he walked. The smoke went up into the rain. The boy in his head said one thing: east. He went east. He tracked Garaki by smell. He had tracked Garaki by smell the night he left the Weapon X laboratory at age 11. He had been holding the scent in the back of his memory since then. Antiseptic, machine oil, and the specific chemical signature of a man who had spent 40 years working with quirk-enhancing compounds and had failed to ever wash it out of his skin. He took the scent off the wind on the avenue outside UA's gate. He took it off the wind 2 blocks east. He took it off the wind at the river. He took it off the wind on the bridge over the river, where the trail was older but unbroken, and he followed it across the bridge and into the warehouse district on the far side. The building was a pharmaceutical storage facility. It used to be. It had a corporate sign on the front that had been changed twice in the last decade, and the latest sign was for a company that existed only on paper. The loading dock was in the alley behind it. The loading dock had a steel door with a magnetic lock. The lock was the kind of lock the school used. The lock was the kind of lock that meant whoever had paid for the building had paid the same suppliers that the country's best heroes paid. He put his right-hand claws through the lock housing. Snicked. The metal of the housing parted around the metal of the claws. The lock cracked open. The door slid sideways an inch. He pushed it the rest of the way. He stepped inside. The corridor inside the loading dock was cold and clean. It smelled the way the mountain laboratory had smelled. It smelled the way the warehouse on the bay had smelled. It was the smell of every wrong room he had ever been in. Compressed and distilled and pumped through the ventilation, and his stomach moved against itself for half a second before he pushed it down and walked on. He was 30 feet down the corridor when the prototype came around the corner. It was 9.5 feet tall. It had 2 arms. Its skull was closed at the top, and the bone over the brain was thick. Its skin was pale. Its eyes had pupils. It had been built with a longer development cycle than the others. And Garaki's hand was on it in a way that the hand had failed to be on the others. Refined, tested, finished. It looked at Izuku, and the look in the eyes was the look of a thing that knew what it was supposed to do. It started healing before he hit it. That was the thing he learned in the first second of the fight. The high-end's regeneration was already engaged. The body was running maintenance constantly, pushing out a slow tide of cellular renewal in advance, so that any wound would close into a tide that was already moving. Garaki had found a way to keep the engine running between fights. The high-end's body was a healing factor that the high-end refused to turn off. The high-end came at him. It moved faster than the 4 at the school. It crossed the corridor in a single stride, and its first punch hit him in the side of the head. His scalp opened. The healing closed it. Its second punch hit him in the kidney. He went sideways. He came back, he brought the claws up under the chin, the claws went in. The flesh closed around the claws as they entered. The claws came out the top of the high end's mouth. The high end opened its mouth around them and bit. Its teeth scraped on the metal. It pulled back. Izuku tore the claws free, and the wound began to close behind them as fast as the gap appeared. He hit it again. He hit it again. He hit it again. The wounds closed every time. It hit him in the chest, it hit him in the stomach. It picked him up by the throat and threw him. He went through a door at the end of the corridor and into the next room. He came up on his feet. He came back through the door. He hit the high end's hip with both sets of claws on a horizontal sweep that took out the femoral artery on one side and the iliac on the other, and the blood came out and the wounds began to close around the bleeding, and he kept moving. He had been in fights longer than this. He had been in fights that were this hard. He had failed to be in fights that were both. He went through 4 rooms with it. The first room was the corridor. The second was a storage bay. The third was an old drug mixing chamber with stainless steel vats along the walls. The fourth was the laboratory at the back, a clean room with white tile floors and surgical lights in the ceiling, and a row of containment tanks along the back wall. And he saw the tanks as he came through the door, and the boy in his head sat down on the floor of his head and refused to look at them. He fought the high end across the laboratory. The high end put him through one of the tanks. The glass came apart around him. The amber fluid ran out across the floor. The smell of the fluid hit him, and the part of him that was 11 years old wanted to leave the body, and he refused it to leave, and he came up out of the puddle of amber fluid with the glass in his back and the claws still extended. The high end grabbed him by the throat. It held him against the wall. It held him there. His feet failed to reach the floor. The high end's grip cut off his airway. He took the choke. He took it for the count of 7. The healing factor began to repair the crushing damage to his trachea, while the trachea was still being crushed. And the body did what it had done 100 times. It took the damage and asked for more time, and the time would come. The high end leaned in. Its mouth opened. It said one thing: yield. He failed to yield. He brought his right knee up. The knee had adamantium under it. The knee went into the high end's groin with the force of a sledgehammer, and the knee was a sledgehammer, and the high end's grip on his throat slipped half an inch, and that was enough. He turned his head. He bit. His teeth had adamantium under them. He bit through the high end's wrist. The wrist came off. He fell back to the floor. He came up out of the choke with his lungs filling on their own again. The high end was looking at the place where its hand had been. The hand was on the floor. The wrist was already healing across the stump. He looked at it. He took a breath. He let it out. 2 ways this goes, he said. He said it to the high end, and he said it to himself. First way, we fight in this room until the sun comes up and you wear me down to bone. Second way, I find your weakness. The high end watched him. You heal everywhere, he said. You heal everywhere except the place I am about to put my hands. He went up the high end. He went up the chest and the shoulder and the side of the neck. The high end's regrown hand caught his thigh. The fingers closed. His femur cracked. He kept climbing. The high end's other hand, which had been the one without the wrist, came around and caught his lower back. The fingers closed there. His lumbar vertebrae cracked. He kept climbing. The high end was holding him with 2 grips and breaking him in 2 places, and he climbed past both of them and put both hands at the temple bones on either side of the high end's head. He drove the claws in. 6 adamantium points went into the temples from either side. They met in the middle. They crossed inside the brain. They sliced. The high end's grip on him released. The high end went down. He wrote it down. He kept the claws in until it hit the floor. He twisted the claws inside the skull until the sliced halves of the brain were 3 sliced halves and then 4. He pulled the claws out. He stood up. He spat blood out onto the white tile. The blood was his and the high end's, and he failed to know whose was whose. He limped to the door at the back of the laboratory. The door was the door to a panic room. He could smell Garaki through it. The doctor was in there. The doctor had been listening to the fight. The doctor's heart rate was a bird in a cage. The doctor's sweat had the chemical signature of a man who had been waiting for this day for 5 years and had been certain it would never come. He put the claws against the seam of the door, snicked. The metal of the panic room door was dense. It was also a door. He had been opening doors for a long time. He cut along the seam. He cut around the lock. He pulled the door out of the frame with one hand and dropped it on the floor of the laboratory. Garaki was sitting in a chair inside. He had a teacup. He had the cream suit. He had the round glasses. The smile he had practiced in a mirror for years was the face he had on now, and the smile was holding the way a smile holds when a man knows the smile is the only weapon he has, and the weapon has stopped working. "Izuku," Garaki said. Izuku stepped into the panic room. He stood in front of the chair. The doctor looked up at him. "My boy," Garaki said, "I have a great deal to tell you." Izuku said nothing. "Sit down," Garaki said. He gestured at a second chair against the wall. He poured a second cup of tea. His hand shook. He put the teapot down. He pretended his hand hadn't shaken. "You have come a long way. You have done what you set out to do. Sit, drink. We will talk like men." Izuku looked at him. "All for One was the one who ordered her death," Garaki said. The voice came out warm. The voice came out warmer than any voice Izuku had ever heard. "I want you to know that. I want you to know I followed the order because I had to. I had been with him for 50 years. I had failed to find a way out of his orbit. I am sorry, Izuku. I have been sorry every day since. Sit. We will plan together. We will go after him." The smell of the apology was the smell of every other thing Garaki had ever said. It was the smell of rotten meat under a clean sheet. Izuku looked at him for a long count. He thought about the kitchen 6 years ago. He thought about a card on a table. He thought about a small hand reaching for that card at age 4 and failing to understand what the words on the card meant. He thought about the same hand reaching for the same card at age 10 with a perfect understanding. He thought about an alley in the rain. He thought about the steel chair in the mountain laboratory and the tubes going into his small bones and the metal coming up through him in a flood of fire. He thought about his mother's hand going cold. "You walked into our apartment when I was four, he said. You looked at her and you saw a frightened parent in a hard country, and you used the word special on her son. You sold her hope. You sold every parent hope. You took 23 children before me and turned them into weapons and called it medicine. You took me at 10 years old and pumped boiling metal through my skeleton and tried to wipe my mind. You built creatures out of the same procedure and pointed them at children at a hero school. You sat in a chair and watched me walk through a column of fire on a screen, and you picked up a phone and called the worst man in the country and asked him for a month." He stopped. Garaki was very still. "You are about to tell me," Izuku said, "that you can be useful to me. You are about to tell me that you have information. You are about to tell me that I am the son you never had. The man in my head is laughing in there, bub, and the man in my head has heard every speech a worse man could give, and you are not going to get a single sentence further with me tonight." Garaki's mouth opened. Garaki's mouth closed. "Get up," Izuku said. Garaki failed to get up. "Get up and stand on your own legs," Izuku said. "Once. The way you made 23 children stand for you. The way you made me stand for you. Get up." Garaki stood. His knees barely held him. Izuku looked at him. He flexed his right hand. The claws came up. Snick. They were silver under the panic room's white light. The blood from the high end was still on them. The blood was drying. He put the claws through Garaki's chest. The doctor's mouth opened around a sound that failed to become a word. The teacup fell. The teacup broke on the floor of the panic room. The doctor's hands came up and held the back of Izuku's hand the way a man holds the hand of someone he loves at the end of a long illness. And Izuku held him there, eye to eye, and the doctor's pupils shrank to points and stayed that way until the heart Izuku could hear stopped. He pulled the claws out. The body came down. He stood over it. He looked at the face. The face was the face that had bowed to his mother in a kitchen 6 years ago and had said, "Come to me when you want true power," and had taken everything in his life from him with one card on a table. "Go ahead," he said. The cigar was still in his pocket. He took it out. He put it between his teeth. He failed to light it. "Take your shot," he said it to the body. He said it to the deal. He said it to a corpse, the way a man says something to a corpse when the corpse was the one who always fired first. He turned around. He walked out of the panic room. He walked across the laboratory. He walked through the corridor. He walked out through the loading dock he had cut his way into, and the rain was still falling on the city, and the cigar was still between his teeth, and he failed to light it for a long time afterward. The League decided that Garaki's death was an opportunity. Shigaraki Torakiti Tomura made the decision at 6 in the morning in a room with broken furniture and a long mirror, while the news was running the first reports of an explosion at a pharmaceutical storage facility on the far side of the river. He was sitting on the floor with his hand at his neck, and his red eyes open under the hand. He had watched the USJ footage. He had watched the sports festival. He had watched the high-end attack on UA on the city's traffic cameras 3 hours after it happened because he had a man inside the prefectural traffic system. He had watched the boy in the leather jacket destroy 4 creatures that Garaki had told the League were ready to take a pro hero down in single combat. He had decided that the boy was the problem. He had decided that the boy was a tool of the system that had failed him. He had decided that the school that protected the boy was the wound the country had refused to clean. He had decided that the only way to prove the system was rotten was to walk into the school's front courtyard during a press briefing and take it apart. He brought everyone he had left. He brought Dabi. He brought Toga. He brought Twice. He brought Mr. Compress. He brought Spinner. He brought 3 Nomu that Garaki's second-in-command had been growing in a secondary facility north of the city. He brought himself. The press briefing was at 2 in the afternoon. It was the principal's idea. The principal was Nezu. He had decided at 4 in the morning that the school could either hide from the country or get in front of it, and he had picked the latter. He had called a press conference for 2 in the afternoon. He had said in the call to the school's PR firm that the country deserved to see the students who had survived the night. Nezu had been wrong about exactly one thing in his career. This was the second. The class assembled in the courtyard at 1:50. They were in their school uniforms. Aizawa was at Recovery Girls. He was alive. He was in a bed. He had a tube in his chest. He was breathing on his own as of 7 in the morning. And Recovery Girl had said, with the voice she used on parents and the voice she failed to use on students, that he would live. Izuku stood at the back of the assembly in his leather jacket. He had slept for 3 hours. He had eaten a piece of toast. He had failed to talk to anyone. He had a cigar behind his ear and the dogs out over his collar, and the new arm hung at his side, and the new arm had the same range of motion as the old one because the body had been doing this for a long time. Uraraka was beside him. Her arm had been bandaged by Recovery Girl after the night, because she had taken a small cut on the lawn from a piece of debris when one of the high ends had come through the dorm wall. The cut was small. The bandage was a square of white over the top of her forearm. She had been beside Izuku since 6 in the morning. She had brought him toast. She had said little. She had sat on a chair in the corner of the room while he slept the 3 hours. She was beside him now. The press came in through the front gate. There were 40 of them. They had cameras, they had microphones, they had the energy of people who had been told their morning would be spent on a story that the country needed and had decided to bring everything they had. Nezu went up to the lectern in the center of the courtyard. He said 3 sentences. The 4th sentence began, and a black mist gate opened in the air behind him. Shigaraki came out of it. He came out of it with his hand at his neck. He came out of it onto the lectern. Nezu, who was small and who was the smartest individual in the country, was off the lectern before Shigaraki's other foot touched the wood, and he had grabbed the principal of the country's most respected hero school by the back of the collar and pulled the principal to safety inside the front doors of the school in 3 running strides. The press cameras rolled. Dabi came out of the gate. Toga came out of the gate. Twice came out of the gate, then doubled himself. And 2 of him came out of the gate. Compress came out of the gate. Spinner came out of the gate. 3 Nomu came out of the gate. The League stood in the courtyard. 40 press cameras held on them. Shigaraki looked across the courtyard. He looked at the press. He looked at the teachers running for cover behind the press. He looked at the class lined up in 2 rows in their uniforms. He looked at the boy in the leather jacket at the back of the second row. Wolverine, Shigaraki said. Izuku looked at him. Shigaraki giggled. The giggle was the giggle of a child who had been told his morning would go a certain way and had been certain that the certainty would carry him through whatever came. Get them, Shigaraki said. The League moved. The Nomu came first. They came in 3 directions across the courtyard. Izuku was already moving. He had been moving since the gate opened. He went forward through the front of the class line, and Ida went out to the right, and Todoroki went out to the left, and Yaoyorozu was already materializing weapons for any classmate who could use them. Izuku reached the first Nomu in 3 strides. Snicked, he went up the body. He found the brain. He came back down. The first Nomu was on the ground inside 15 seconds. He went to the second one. He went to the third one. He went through them the way the country had watched him go through the USJ one, the way the country had watched him go through the high ends in the UA courtyard on leaked traffic camera footage, the way the country had been watching him go through trained creatures designed to kill heroes since he was 16 years old, and the press cameras held on him. The third Nomu went down at the 1-minute mark. He was breathing through his teeth. He turned and looked at the rest of the League. Compress took a step forward. He raised his hand. The marble formed in his palm. He threw it at Izuku. The marble closed around Izuku's right hand. Izuku stood there for a half second with his right hand a marble the size of a peach. He flexed his hand inside the marble. Snicked. The marble cracked. The marble fragmented. The fragments came apart in a 6-foot radius, and 2 of Compress's fingers went with them. Because Compress had been standing inside the radius of his own attack, the way Compress always stood when he was confident of the marble holding, Compress dropped to his knees. He held his hand. He looked at his fingers on the courtyard tile. Run, Izuku said to him. Compress ran. Twice doubled himself again. The 4 twices ran in 4 directions. One of them ran directly into Todoroki's left side, and the fire took him. And one of the 4 twices went down. Spinner had a sword. Spinner came at Izuku across the courtyard with the sword raised over his head. Izuku stepped sideways. The sword came down on the courtyard tile. Izuku put his right hand through the flat of the sword. The sword came apart in 2 pieces. He looked at Spinner. Run, he said. Spinner ran. That left Dabi. That left Toga. That left Shigaraki. Toga had been moving sideways the whole time. She had been working her way to Uraraka. He saw her 2 seconds before she reached the edge of the class line. He smelled the wrong blood under the right face. Toga had taken the face of a 3rd-year student, a girl named Psycho Intelli, whose blood had the iron content of someone with mild anemia, and whose breath did not smell like the breath of the girl coming across the courtyard. He moved. He cleared the courtyard in 3 strides. He stepped between Toga and Uraraka. Toga's knife went into Uraraka's left forearm above the bandage from the night before, a shallow drag, an opener. Uraraka cried out and stepped back. Toga turned her face up and looked at Izuku. The face was the 3rd year's face. The smile underneath the face was Toga's. She ran. He let her run. The math was clear. He had Dabi and Shigaraki in the courtyard, and they were the present tense, and Toga had been a complication that had failed, and Toga was smart enough to be a survivor and useless to the League once she had run. He turned to Uraraka. You all right? She was holding her arm. The cut was shallow. She nodded. Get behind Yaoyorozu's wall, he said. He pointed. Yaoyorozu had built a curved steel barricade across the front doors of the school. Half the press had moved behind it. Stay there. She moved. He turned to Dabi. Dabi was already moving. Dabi's fire was real and sustained. He came across the courtyard in a running leap and threw a column of blue flame at Izuku at 3 meters range. The flame was hot. The flame was hotter than any fire Izuku had walked through since Todoroki at the festival. And Todoroki at the festival had been a 16-year-old's fire, and Dabi was older and angrier and had been pushing his own body past its safety margin for years. Izuku raised both arms. The flame hit him. His jacket went up. His tank top went up. His sweatpants caught at the cuff. He kept walking. Dabi came back. Dabi threw another column. Izuku walked into it. Dabi stepped back. Dabi threw a 3rd column. Izuku walked through it. The skin on his chest and arms and face was charring and pulling, and the healing factor was pulling new skin up underneath in a continuous flow, and the flow was the only thing keeping him in the fight. He reached Dabi. He grabbed Dabi by the front of the coat. He lifted him. He walked him backward across the courtyard and into the wall of the school. He held him there. His forearm went across Dabi's chest. The forearm had adamantium in it. Dabi could feel the metal under the burn-rebuilt skin. Izuku looked at him. He looked at the staples in Dabi's face. He looked at the burn scarring on the neck. He looked at the eyes. He saw a man who was burning himself alive every time he used the fire, and he saw a man who had been doing it for years. And he saw a man whose anger had a name in it that the country would learn one day, and that the country would weep when it learned. "One chance," Izuku said. "Walk away." Dabi looked at him. "You can't win this," Dabi said. He said it through the forearm at his chest. "There's a man you have never met who is the reason you exist. Killing everyone around him will fail to touch him." "I know," Izuku said. "That's why I'm going to touch him directly." Dabi looked at him for a long count. He thought about something. Whatever it was, his face changed. The fight went out of his eyes. The thing under the fight came up, and the thing under the fight was a man who had been burning for so long that he had forgotten what cold air felt like. "Walk away," Izuku said again. He stepped back. He let go of Dabi's coat. Dabi looked at him. Dabi looked at the courtyard. Dabi looked at the gate. Dabi walked away. He went through the gate at a steady pace, which was the pace of a man whose pride refused to let him run and whose body refused to let him stay. He cleared the gate. He turned right. He was gone down the street before the press cameras finished tracking him. The boy in Izuku's head said one thing. "That one is yours later, kid." Shigaraki was the last one in the courtyard. He had been watching. His hand was at his neck. He was scratching. The scratching had broken skin under the fingernails, and a thin line of blood had run down the side of his throat. He was looking at Izuku across the smoke and the fire damage and the bodies of the 3 Nomu and the place where Compress's fingers had landed on the courtyard tile, and his face was the face of a child who had found the ending of the story wrong. "I thought you would be a problem for him," Shigaraki said. "I thought you would be the obstacle between me and taking everything apart." "And?" Izuku said. "You are the same thing," Shigaraki said. "You are just a weapon that walks around thinking it chose a side." Izuku looked at him. He let the words in. He failed to argue. The decay of Shigaraki Tamura was a quirk that took apart anything it touched with all 5 fingers. 5 points of contact. The decay ran across the surface of whatever the fingers touched and broke the bonds inside it. Izuku had been thinking about this quirk since the USJ. He had been thinking about it because the USJ had been a confrontation that had cut short, and a confrontation that had cut short tended to come back. And the way Shigaraki's hand had drifted up to his own neck across the dome floor of the USJ had been the gesture of a man whose quirk was a thing he was about to use. He had been thinking about it through the high-end attack. He had been thinking about it through Garaki. He had been thinking about it through the night and through the press conference. And he had concluded that the decay was a quirk that took apart anything it touched, and that the bones of his skeleton were wrapped in the one substance the world had failed to find a way to take apart, and that this was a fight he had been waiting for since the first day of class. He started walking toward Shigaraki. Shigaraki put his hand on the courtyard tile. The decay went into the tile. The tile crumbled in a 6-meter radius around Shigaraki's hand. The radius opened a crater. Izuku stepped through the crater. The crater collapsed under his weight, and his weight had adamantium in it, and the adamantium drove him down into the broken tile and on through the broken tile, and the decay had taken the surface, and he was past the surface. Shigaraki put his other hand on the courtyard wall. A section of the wall came apart. Stones the size of cinder blocks rained down across the courtyard. Izuku raised his right arm. A stone hit his arm. The stone broke against the arm. Another stone hit his shoulder. Another stone hit his head. The healing factor closed the cuts on his scalp. He kept walking. Shigaraki ran. He ran across the courtyard. He ran for the side of the school. He put his hand on the corner of the building. The corner came apart. The wall failed. A section of the third floor began to slip down the side of the building. Izuku stepped sideways. The section of wall came down where he had been standing. He kept walking. Shigaraki turned. He came in. He came in fast. His hand came up at Izuku's throat. He led with all 5 fingers extended. The fingers went around Izuku's wrist, which Izuku had brought up to block, and the decay went up the wrist. The decay went through skin. It went through muscle. It went through tendon. It hit bone. It stopped. Shigaraki's eyes went wide under the hand on his face. He looked at the place where his fingers were on Izuku's wrist. The decay had run up the wrist and had stopped at the bone, which was metal, which the decay failed to take apart. Izuku looked at him. "The metal under my skin isn't a thing your hand can find a hold on," he said. He brought his other hand up. He put it across Shigaraki's face. He shoved. Shigaraki went down. Hard. He hit the ground. He rolled. He came back up because Shigaraki was a harder man to put down than he looked, because Shigaraki had been training, because Shigaraki had something in him that came out under pressure, and that something was a ferocity that had less to do with his quirk than with his life. He had been All for One's project for as long as he could remember. He had been built to refuse to fall. Izuku watched him come back up. The fight that followed was the worst fight Izuku Midoriya had been in since the UA lawn the night before. It went through the courtyard, it went out into the school's front lawn, it went past the gate, it went into the street. Shigaraki took the street apart in sections. He put his hands on parked cars, and the cars came apart. He put his hands on street lamps, and the street lamps came apart. He put his hands on the pavement, and the pavement opened in long fissures that climbed up the sides of buildings and brought walls down in slow collapses. Izuku absorbed all of it. He took a section of street lamp through the shoulder. The healing pulled it out and closed the wound. He took a falling balcony across the back. The healing reset his spine. He took a chunk of pavement across the side of the head, and his temple opened from hairline to ear. The healing closed the wound while the chunk of pavement was still bouncing on the asphalt next to him. Shigaraki ran out of environment. He ran out of it because Izuku had been letting him use it. Izuku had been wading through the wide area attacks. Izuku had been walking through them because he had counted the things Shigaraki could touch and had counted the things Shigaraki could find in this district. And he had timed the count against the rate at which Shigaraki was using them, and the count had run down at the 8-minute mark. Shigaraki turned a corner. The corner opened onto an empty intersection. There was a stoplight. There was a section of sidewalk. There was a single bench. Shigaraki put his hand on the bench. The bench failed. Izuku closed the last 3 meters. He caught Shigaraki by the front of the coat. He lifted him. He held him off the ground the way he had held Bakugo off the ground in the arena, eye to eye, with the man's boots dangling. Shigaraki's hands were free. Shigaraki failed to put them on Izuku. The hands were at Shigaraki's sides. They had stopped moving. Shigaraki was looking at Izuku from a place behind his own eyes that Shigaraki spent every day refusing to use. He was looking at Izuku the way a man looks when the man has been performing a role for so long that he has lost track of the face under the mask, and someone has just lifted the mask. "All for One used you," Izuku said. Shigaraki said nothing. "He used me too," Izuku said. "He killed my mother and pointed the grief at a doctor named Garaki and waited to see what came out the other end. He builds weapons out of children and calls it purpose." "I know what that is. I have been it." A long silence. "You have no idea what I've lost," Izuku said. He let the line out. He let it land. He failed to look away. Shigaraki's face moved. "I am going to end him," Izuku said. "You can tell me where he is, or you can die failing to know if I succeeded." Shigaraki's mouth opened. Shigaraki's mouth closed. He looked at the boy in the leather jacket. He looked at the dog tags. He looked at the face that had been built by the same hands and the same workshop and the same hatred that had built him. And he saw for 1 second what the face was. He told Izuku where All for One was. He told him the name of the facility. He told him the name of the county. He told him the names of the 2 pro-heroes on rotation and the rough size of the guard detail and the layout of the medical wing. He told him because the man on the other end of those facts had been the only father he had ever had, and the man on the other end of those facts had taught him that Loyalty was a thing people gave to the hand that fed them. And the hand had failed to feed him for 2 years, and the boy with the metal under his skin had asked him a question without lying about why he was asking. When he was done, Izuku set him down. Shigaraki sat on the curb. He stayed there. He had stopped scratching his neck. The blood had dried at the side of his throat. Izuku looked down at him. "You aren't going to follow me," he said. "You're going to sit on this curb until the heroes find you. You're going to let them take you. You're going to spend the next 10 years of your life in a room thinking about who you are and what you want to do with the part of your life that isn't him. That's the deal. That's all I'm offering." Shigaraki looked up at him. "Why?" he said. Izuku considered the question. "Because I had to find out who I was without the man who made me too," he said. "And nobody got to do it for me. I am giving you what nobody gave me, kid. Take it." He turned around. He walked away. Shigaraki sat on the curb until the heroes found him. He let them take him. He let them put the cuffs on. He went into the holding van without a word. The country saw all of it on the press cameras that had followed the fight from the school. The country saw the boy in the leather jacket walk away from the curb and back toward UA, with his bare feet on the wet asphalt and a press crew running after him with microphones up. The lead reporter caught up to him 100 meters from the school gate. The microphone came at his face. The camera came over his shoulder. The reporter's voice was the voice of a man who had been told to get a sentence and who knew his career depended on getting one. "Wolverine, Midoriya-san, a word for the country. Are you a hero? Are you—" Izuku failed to slow down. "I'm not the hero you're looking for, bub," he said. He failed to look at the camera. "I'm the other kind." He went through the gate. The reporter stayed at the gate. The footage ran live. The line went into every household in the country before the boy reached the school's front steps. Izuku failed to go alone. He went alone in the sense that he made the decision alone, and he told no one, and he was 3 blocks from UA when Aizawa's voice came over a comm that Recovery Girl had put in his ear without asking while she had been treating the burn line on his throat from Dabi. "I know where you're going," Aizawa said. Aizawa's voice was thin. Aizawa's voice was the voice of a man who had a tube in his chest and who had been told to lie still. Aizawa was lying still. Aizawa was speaking through a comm pickup that Recovery Girl had set up at the side of his bed against her own better judgment, because a man with a tube in his chest had asked her for it, and the man was the man who had pulled Izuku Midoriya off the docks. "Good," Izuku said. "I can have a team ready and you can have Todoroki," Izuku said, "and Uraraka if she wants. That's it. This is a small trip. The man at the end of it doesn't deserve a parade." A pause. "Kid," Aizawa said. The voice was the voice of a man who had been through the worst night of the last 5 years and who still had his ribs taped from it. "Come back." "I'll come back. Come back the way you went out." Izuku held the comm at his ear for a long count. "All right, bub," he said. He took the comm out. He put it in his pocket. Todoroki was already behind him. He had been following since the school gate. He was in his school uniform with the collar turned up. His left side was warm. His right side was cool. He failed to say anything when Izuku looked back at him because Todoroki had been around Izuku long enough to know the rhythm of when to speak and when to fall in. Izuku looked at him for a long count. "All right," he said. Uraraka caught up at the train station. She was in civilian clothes. Her arm was bandaged from Toga's cut and from the previous night. She had a small bag over her shoulder. She had her hair tied back. She had the eyes of a person who had cried in a bathroom and washed her face and come out and made a decision. "I'm coming," she said. It failed to be a question. Izuku looked at her. He thought about telling her to stay. He thought about it for one full breath. The boy in his head said one thing. "Let her." "All right," he said. They got on the train. The train was the last train of the night. The car was empty. There were 3 of them. They sat in the back. Todoroki took the seat across from Izuku and Uraraka. He looked out the window. Uraraka sat next to Izuku. She put her bag on the floor. She put her hands in her lap. The train moved. The country went past the window in a long, slow flow of small towns and rice paddies and the lights of 1,000 small farms. Izuku looked at Uraraka in the reflection of the glass. She looked back at him in the reflection. She held his eye there. She failed to look at him directly. She held him in the glass. Todoroki spoke once during the trip. "The first time I used my left side in a fight was because of you," he said. He said it without turning from the window. He said it the way a man pays a debt he is glad to owe. Izuku looked at him. "Good," Izuku said. That was the conversation. The train pulled into the station at 1 a.m. The station was a small one. The town around the station had 3 streetlights. The facility was 4 kilometers north of the town, on a road that the maps refused to acknowledge. They walked the 4 kilometers. The road was empty. The night was clear. The snow had come early in this part of the country, and the road had a thin layer of white over the asphalt, and their footsteps were the only sound. Izuku watched the sky. The boy in his head was quiet. The boy in his head had been quiet since the curb with Shigaraki, and Izuku found, walking along the empty road with 2 of his classmates behind him and the cold air going into his lungs, that he had failed to need the boy in his head for the first time in his life. The facility was a low building set back from the road behind a fence. The fence was electrified. The building had 2 visible entrances and 4 invisible ones. There were 23 armed guards inside. There were 2 combat-capable pro heroes stationed on rotation. The building had a biometric security system. The interior had a set of sealed blast doors rated for high-yield explosive quirks at the entrance to the medical wing. All for One had known they were coming for 40 minutes. He had known because he had informants at the train station. 3 of the men at the station had been on All for One's payroll for 15 years. They had failed to recognize Izuku Midoriya at first, because Izuku Midoriya was wearing a coat, and the coat had hidden the dog tags, but they had recognized Todoroki immediately, and they had made a phone call. The facility had gone to alert at 12:47. The 2 pro heroes had been woken up. The guards had been moved into position. The blast doors had been sealed. Izuku stopped 50 meters from the fence. He looked at the building. He took the cigar from behind his ear. He lit it. He took a draw. He let the smoke out into the cold air, and the smoke went up white and long. "Here's how it goes," he said. Todoroki and Uraraka came up next to him. "There are 23 guards in there. They are men with families. They are paid to do a job. We don't kill them. Todoroki, you handle the cameras and the heat sensors on the way in. The cold doesn't have to be heavy. Just enough to fog the lenses. Uraraka, when we come up on the guards, you take them off the floor before they can reach a panic button. Pin them to the ceiling. They stay safe. They stay out of the way. I will handle the 2 heroes when we get to them. I will handle the doors. I will handle the man at the end." He took another draw on the cigar. "You stay behind me past the second corridor," he said. "I'm going to ask you to do one thing in particular." He looked at Uraraka. "Whatever I do at the end, whatever you see, you and Todoroki are going to walk out behind me. We are going to get on the train. We're going to come home. We're going to keep walking. You don't talk to anyone about it. You don't think about it past tonight. You let me carry it. That's the deal. Take it or get on the next train back." Uraraka looked at him. "I'll take it," she said. Todoroki nodded once. Izuku finished the cigar. He flicked it into the snow. The snow took the ember and put it out. They went over the fence. Todoroki sent up a thin layer of frost across the camera housings as they crossed the inner courtyard. The cameras kept turning. The cameras failed to see. The heat sensors at the door read 3 small disturbances, and Todoroki let his right side push out a wave of cold that brought the ambient temperature of the doorway down 2 degrees, and the sensors registered nothing. The first 3 guards were inside the door. Uraraka put her fingers on each of them in turn. She had been practicing the speed of her touch for a year. The contact was the flick of a fingertip on a uniformed shoulder. The guards came off the floor. They went up. They hit the ceiling at a soft angle and stayed there, weightless, drifting in slow rotation, their rifles drifting beside them. 2 of them tried to shout. Uraraka touched their rifles. The rifles drifted out of their reach. The shouting stopped because the guards had figured out, after a count of 3, that yelling for help when the help was already a building away was a way to hurt their own dignity. Izuku went past them. He went down the corridor. He went around 2 corners. He went past 3 more guards, and Uraraka took all 3 of them off the floor with the same flick of contact, and they drifted up to the ceiling and joined the count. He reached the first sealed blast door. He put the claws against the seam, snicked. He cut along the seam, he cut the lock housing, he cut the magnetic plate. The door opened a 1/4 inch, he got his fingers in the gap. He pulled. The door slid sideways. He stepped through. The 2 pro heroes were waiting. They came in from either side of the corridor. The first was a man in his 40s whose quirk turned his arms to obsidian. The second was a woman in her 30s whose quirk increased her own gravity at will. Izuku held up his right hand. The claws were in. "Don't," he said. He said it to both of them. "I'm going through this corridor. The man past these doors is the man who ordered my mother's death. The school I came from has lost 2 students this week to creatures he engineered. I am going through. The 2 of you can stand down, or we do this the hard way." The man with the obsidian arms looked at the woman. The woman looked at the man. The woman shook her head. The man came in. His arm came around in an obsidian fist the size of a shovel. Izuku stepped inside the swing. He brought his shoulder up. The fist hit the shoulder. The adamantium under the shoulder failed to give. The man's fist cracked. The obsidian came apart in long shards. The man stepped back, holding his arm. The woman raised her hand. Her gravity field came down on Izuku in a vertical column. He dropped to one knee. The field doubled. He dropped to both knees. The field tripled. He looked up at her under the weight of 3 normal gravities pressing down on his shoulders. "I'm the best there is at what I do," he said. The voice came out low through his teeth. "But what I do isn't very nice. Stand down. You don't want to be in my way tonight." She failed to stand down. He stood up. The field tripled again. He took the field. The bones in his legs held. The metal under the bones held. He stood up out of the field. Slowly, the way a man stands up under a weight that has been put on his shoulders by the world, and the field stayed at 4 gravities, and he kept standing, and the woman's hand began to shake. She let the field go. He looked at her. "Last chance," he said. She stepped back. The man with the obsidian arms had stopped trying. His arm was healing back into place along the bone. He was looking at the boy in the corridor and at the boy's classmates behind him, and he was thinking about which side of the fight had a future in the country, and which side had a future tonight. "Go," the man said. Izuku went. He went down the corridor. He reached the second sealed blast door. He put the claws against the seam, snicked. He cut along the seam. The door opened. He stepped through into the room beyond it. All for One was in a chair. He was connected to a respirator. He was connected to 4 monitoring machines. He had a quirk suppression field on him that the government had built around the chair 2 years ago and that had kept him from being useful to his own people for that long. He was ancient. He was damage-wrapped in expensive medical equipment. His face was the ruin of something that had once been calculating and now was just patient. His eyes had been replaced. The replacements were dim in the low light of the room. He had been awake since the alarm. He had been listening. He had been smiling under the respirator the whole time. The smile was the smile he had been practicing for 100 years. And the smile was the smile that had convinced kings. He saw Izuku come through the door, his head turned, his good arm, the one that worked, lifted half an inch on the rest of the chair. He failed to speak yet. He was waiting for Izuku to come into the room. Todoroki and Uraraka were behind Izuku. Izuku stepped past the threshold. "Behind me," he said. "Both of you." They stepped behind him. He walked into the room. He failed to stop until he was 3 meters from the chair. He looked at the man in the chair. He looked at the equipment. He looked at the face. What was left of it after All Might? "Izuku," All for One said. The voice came out through the respirator. It was old and patient. It was the voice of a man who had been speaking through machines for a long time and had learned to speak through them well. "You have come a long way," All for One said. "You have done what you set out to do." Izuku failed to answer. "I have been waiting for this conversation since the day you were born," All for One said. "I want you to know that. Sit down. There are things to discuss." There was no second chair in the room. The thing he was offering was the floor or the wall, or it was the suggestion that there was a chair. That a man like him could conjure a chair with a sentence the way he had conjured every other thing he had ever wanted in his life. Izuku failed to sit. All for One smiled. The smile was a thing that worked behind the respirator in the angle of the eyes. "All right," he said. "Stand. Listen. I will say what I have to say, and you will leave or stay, and the leaving and the staying will be your choice. I have learned in my long life that the only people who are useful in the long term are people who have made a choice with their eyes open." He took a breath. The respirator wheezed. "Garaki was a useful tool," he said. "Garaki was a man with hands. He had the hands of a fine craftsman, but the heart of a small man. He made you. The making was crude. The fact that you survived the making is the proof that you were always more than what he was building. I knew that the day I sent the men into the apartment when you were 4. I knew it the day I sent the men into the alley when you were 10. I knew it the day Garaki put you in the chair. I have been the gardener, Izuku. Garaki was the spade. The spade does not get to take credit for the orchard." Izuku looked at him. "You ordered her death," he said. "Yes," All for One said. He failed to soften the word. He failed to perform regret. He had decided 90 years ago that performance of regret was a tactic that had been used on him too many times to use on others. "I ordered it. The order was made because the four-year-old boy who had a man in a small bedroom had to be tested under the worst pressure can know. Garaki's a child can know. Garaki's people were instructed to take her in front of you. The instruction was followed. The result was the boy who walked into the mountain laboratory at age 10 and demanded what he demanded. The result was the boy who walked out of the same laboratory at age 11 with the metal in his bones. The result is the man standing in this room. I made that man, Izuku. I made him by removing the only thing that would have softened him." Izuku said nothing. "The country is a wound," All for One said. "It has been a wound for 60 years. The symbol of peace was a bandage on the wound, and the bandage is failing now because All Might is dying. I can smell it on you. You have been close enough to him to smell it too. You and I are the two creatures in this country who know the bandage is failing." He paused. The respirator wheezed. "I am offering you the country," he said. "I am offering you what I have been building towards since before you were born. The system is rotten at the core. The Hero Commission is a fiction that paid Garaki out of an off-the-books fund for 15 years. The pro-heroes you trained alongside were promoted by a metric that has nothing to do with virtue. The country needs a hand at the throat, Izuku. It needs the hand to close. I cannot close it anymore. Look at me. I am damaged in a chair, but you can. You are my son in every way that matters. The boy in your head, Logan, fought in wars I read about as a young man. He understands what I am saying. Ask him." The boy in his head said nothing. The boy in his head had been quiet since the curb. The boy in his head was listening, but the boy in his head was leaving the answer to the body that was standing in the room. Izuku stood there. He thought about it. He thought about it the way a man thinks about an offer that has been made by the worst man he has ever met. He thought about the fact that some of what All for One was saying was true. The Hero Commission had been corrupt. The bandage was failing. All Might was dying. The country had been built on a fiction. He thought about Inko. He thought about her hand in his at age 4 when the police came. He thought about her hand in his at age 10 when the rain came down. He thought about the way she had laughed in a kitchen 6 years ago, and the way she had made bad tea, and the way she had forgiven him for everything before he did it. He thought about a card on a kitchen table. He thought about Aizawa on the lawn with a tube in his chest and his eyes closed. He thought about Uraraka sitting on a bench 3 months ago, taking his hand. He thought about the boy he had been at 4 years old with 3 bone claws in each hand, standing over the body of a man in a small bedroom. He looked at All for One. "Go to hell," he said. All for One's smile failed. The smile failed in the eyes first. The eyes were the only part of him that still worked the way a man's eyes worked, and the smile in them died because the man had been certain for a long count of seconds that the offer had landed. It had failed to land. "Izuku," All for One said. "Think about what you are." "Enough," Izuku said. The word landed in the room the way a stone lands in still water. All for One's mouth closed. Izuku walked past the equipment. He walked to the chair. He looked down at the man in it. He thought about Logan. He thought about 100 years of Logan. He thought about every fight Logan had been in, and every man Logan had stood over at the end of every fight. And he thought about the ones Logan had walked away from and the ones Logan had finished. He thought about the rule the boy in his head had carried for 100 years. The rule was, the men who go on hurting people after you walk away are the men you should have finished. He looked at All for One. He flexed his right hand. Snicked. 3 claws came up. He did what needed to be done. He did it with one hand. He failed to flourish. He failed to perform. He put the claws through the man's chest at the place where the heart was, and he held them there. And the heart that had been pumping for over 100 years on borrowed lungs and a stolen jaw stopped pumping. The respirator went on for 3 more breaths. Then the respirator stopped because the equipment was tied to the heart rate, and the heart rate had gone flat, and the equipment had decided that its work was done. The room was very quiet. Izuku pulled the claws out. The body settled in the chair. He stood there for a count of 5. He felt one thing he failed to expect. He felt a small space open at the back of his chest. The space had been pressed shut for 13 years, since the day the men had come into his apartment when he was 4 years old. The space had stayed pressed shut through every fight in every basement and every winter morning on a frozen ridge and every cigar he had failed to enjoy and every meal he had eaten alone. The space opened. The space stayed open. He took a breath. The breath came in the way a breath comes in to a man who has been holding the same breath for a long time. He turned around. Todoroki and Uraraka were in the doorway. They had failed to enter the room past the threshold. They had been told to stay behind him, and they had stayed. He looked at them. He flexed his hand. The claws came inward. "Let's go home," he said. They went home. The country found out in the morning. It failed to find out all at once. The government controlled the initial release. The facility was classified. The report that ran on the morning news said only that the most dangerous villain in Japanese history had died in custody during a security incident. The report failed to mention 3 students from UA's Class 1A. The report failed to mention adamantium claws or a boy with green eyes who smelled of tobacco and old grief. The hero world figured it out in 4 days. The underground figured it out in 2. Aizawa called Izuku into the empty classroom. Aizawa was on his feet again. He had been on his feet for a week. Recovery Girl had cleared him for partial duty, with a tube still in his chest and a wrap around his ribs and the bone structure of a man who had been told twice that he had come within a centimeter of dying. He was at his desk in the empty classroom. He had a cigarette unlit between his fingers. He had 4 cups of coffee on the desk in various states of going cold. He looked at Izuku. Izuku sat down across from him. "You went without telling me," Aizawa said. "You knew where I was going. You went without a proper team. It was proper enough." Aizawa looked at him, the kind of look that carried a dozen things in it that a man like Aizawa would only say one of. "You could have told me," Aizawa said. The one he picked. Izuku held his eyes. He heard all the others behind it. "Next time," he said. "There won't be a next time," Aizawa said. "Not like that. There won't." They looked at each other. Aizawa lit the cigarette. He took a drag. He let it out. The smoke curled up between them. He looked at the boy across the desk for a long count. "You know what the part of the job is that nobody warns you about?" he said. "What?" "The kid you find on a dock at 15 turns into the man who sits across from you at 17, and you have less to teach him than you did the night you found him." Izuku looked at him. "I have plenty to learn, bub," he said. "From me?" Izuku considered it. "From you," he said. Aizawa's mouth pulled at one corner. It was the closest thing to a smile Izuku had seen on him since the night of the docks. "All right," Aizawa said. "Get out of my classroom. I have a class in 15 minutes, and you have made me sentimental." Izuku stood up. He went out. All Might came to him on the rooftop where they usually met. The pro hero was in his slimmer form. Izuku had been smelling the sickness on him for 3 months. The sickness that was the smell of an old fire that had been burning down for years, and the fire was running out of fuel, and the body around the fire was running out of patience with being a body. All Might sat down on the bench. He looked at the city. He looked at the late afternoon sun. He failed to speak for a long time. I am glad it was you, he said. He said it without looking at Izuku. Izuku said nothing. I am glad it was someone who understood what he was, All Might said. I was the symbol of peace. The symbol of peace had limits. The symbol of peace was never going to do what you did in that room, and the country needed what you did. He turned. He looked at Izuku. What do you need? He asked. Izuku thought about it. It was the first time anyone had asked him that question and meant it without wanting an answer that fit into a larger plan. He held the question for a count of 5. He looked at the city across the rooftop. He thought about the answer. He gave it. I need to finish the year, he said. All Might looked at him. All right, he said. And you need to live a few more, Izuku said. All Might's eyebrows went up 0.5 millimeter. My time is my time, young Midoriya, he said. Your time is what you make it, Izuku said. I have known a few men who refused to die because the world had failed to give them permission. Be one of them. We have a class to graduate. All Might looked at him for a long count. All right, kid, he said. He said it the way Izuku said it. He had been around Izuku long enough to learn the rhythm. Bakugo found him on the roof of the dorm 3 days after the facility. Bakugo failed to knock. He came up the stairs and pushed the door open and leaned against the door frame. His hands were in his pockets. His hair was wet from a shower. He smelled of nitroglycerin sweat and protein powder and something else that Izuku had failed to smell on him before. A thing that was the smell of a man who had been thinking for several days in a row about a small set of questions. Izuku was sitting on the edge with his legs over the side. He was smoking. Bakugo failed to speak for a long time. You ended it, Bakugo said. Izuku took a draw. Bakugo's jaw moved. I would have been there, he said. If you'd asked. Izuku looked at him. He looked at the city. He took another draw. I know, he said. Bakugo stood there. He failed to say anything else. He turned around. He went back down the stairs. He left the door open behind him. Izuku looked at the city for a long time after that. He thought about Bakugo. He thought about a kid in a kindergarten classroom on the first day of school screaming because someone had taken his marker. He thought about the boy who had walked into Class 1A with his hands lit and his mouth open and a grievance with the world that the world had failed to ever explain to him. He thought about the boy who had stood up after the arena bout with the bowing of one fighter to another and had spent a week refusing to look at him and had then, one Tuesday afternoon, dropped a protein bar on Izuku's desk while walking past on the way out of class. He thought about a man on a roof who had said, I would have been there, and had meant it. The boy in his head said one thing. Some people you collect by waiting. Izuku finished the cigar. He flicked the ember off the roof. The ember went out before it hit the ground. Uraraka found him the next day on the bench where she had first brought him his duffel bag after the sports festival. She sat next to him. He was failing to smoke. He was just sitting. The afternoon light was on the bench. The school noise was around them. The sound of students moving between classes, the sound of a coach's whistle on the training ground, the sound of a piano in the music room being played by someone who had been working on the same passage for an hour. She failed to say anything for a while. She had been around him long enough to know the silence. She had learned it from him. She had learned that the silence was a thing to share rather than a thing to fill, and she shared it. She took his hand. He let her. They sat there for a long time in the afternoon light, with the school noise around them. Steve back to end, his hand in hers, and the boy in his head said nothing, and Izuku Midoriya failed to fill the silence with anything. And the warmth of her hand was the same warmth that had been there in the holding room after the sports festival, and the same warmth that had been in the dream in the dorm, and the same warmth that had been the only thing that cut through the iron in him since he was 4 years old, and his mother had stroked his hair on the floor of an apartment. He held her hand. He let it be warm. After a long count, she spoke. What you said in the courtyard, she said. To Shigaraki. About fighting. He looked at her. You said it before, she said. In the holding room. After the festival. You said you fight because if you stop, you forget. He failed to answer. I get it, she said. He looked at her. He looked at her for a long count. Yeah, he said. He held his hand. I get it, she said again. They sat there. The afternoon kept being the afternoon. The piano in the music room finished the passage and started the next one. 6 months later, he was 17. He was still at UA. He was still in the leather jacket and the dog tags, though the school had stopped telling him to wear the uniform because the school had learned which arguments with Izuku Midoriya were worth having. He sat on the frozen ridge again. He failed to plan to go back. He had been on a weekend run through the mountains north of the city. Physical training, because his body needed constant use, or it began to store the stillness in ways that came out in his sleep. And his feet had taken him to the ridge without consulting his head, and he had found himself on the edge of it, as he had been on the edge of it at age 11, and he had stayed. He looked out over the valley. The valley was white with early snow. The sky was iron gray. The wind was a long, thin blade off the far ridge. The same wind that had been the wind on the morning he had stood here at age 11 in a hospital gown with bare feet and adamantium under his skin. He was the same person who had stood here at 11 years old. He was a different person who had stood here at 11 years old. He looked at his hands. He flexed them, snicked. 6 adamantium claws extended in the winter light. The snow came down on them. The metal held the cold without changing. He looked at them for a long time. He thought about every person who was gone. He thought about Inko. He thought about Garaki. He thought about All for One. He thought about everyone, in every basement, in every city, and everyone on the dock, and everyone at UA and Aizawa in a doorway, and All Might on a rooftop, and Todoroki's left side warm, and Uraraka's hand. He thought about Bakugo on the roof of the dorm with the door left open behind him. He thought about the boy in his head. The boy in his head had been quiet for months. He was still there. He was always going to be there. Logan was a passenger no man could drop at a station and leave. He was the foundation. He was the floor under the floor. But in the last months, since the room with the man in the chair, the boy in his head had been giving more space to the one standing on the ridge, giving Izuku the room. The way an old man gives a young man the room, when the young man has finally earned the right to take up space, he stood there. The snow fell on his shoulders. He thought about something the old man had said once in a different world, in a different body, to a different set of people who had been trying to make him into something he had failed to be. He thought about the words. He thought about how the words had been a refusal in that world. In this world, the words could be a beginning. He flexed his hand back. The claws retracted with a soft mechanical kiss. The knuckles closed over the gaps. He looked at the valley. He tilted his head back. He failed to howl this time. He breathed. The breath came out white in the cold air. The breath went up and was caught by the wind and was carried out across the valley, and it was a small sound and a soft sound and a sound that the valley took without echoing. He was 17 years old. He had already lived forever. He was standing on airage in the winter with a cigar in his pocket that he had failed to light, yet in a school to get back to, and a girl who wolfed coffee outside his door in the mornings, and a teacher with tired-read eyes who called him kid and meant to something good. He was failing to be done. He was the best there is at what he does. He was slowly becoming something that was also very nice. He turned around. He started walking back. The path down the ridge was steep. The snow was thin under the trees. He went at the pace of a man who had nowhere he had to be by any specific time and who knew for the first time in his life that the place he was going to be at the end of the walk was a place that had been waiting for him. Halfway down the ridge, the wind shifted. He smelled the city. He smelled the school. He smelled the dorm. He smelled a small, specific scent that was warm bread and a cheap soap, and the trace of a girl who had been very tired and very brave for a year and a half, sitting on the bench by the front gate. She had been waiting for him. She had brought coffee. The corner of his mouth lifted. He kept walking. He went down the ridge. He went down through the trees. He came out at the road that led back to the train. He took the train. He took the bus. He came up the long hill to the school in the late afternoon light, with the cold air on his face and the dog tags warm under his shirt. She was on the bench. She had a thermos. She had a paperback book. She had her legs pulled up under her on the bench and her cheeks pink from the cold. She looked up when he came through the gate. She smiled. The boy in his head said one thing, very softly. "Welcome home." "Kid, Izuku Midoriya walked across the courtyard to the bench where she was sitting. He sat down next to her. She handed him the coffee. He took it. He let it be warm.
The hero roster. A massive salute to the legends backing this journey. Your support is what keeps the momentum at an all-time high and the dream moving forward. You guys are the absolute best. Pro heroes, the elite front line, stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. DA, Fire 05.
Symbol of peace. The pillars of the community, the titans who keep our foundation solid and the hype at an all-time high. Aries Bryant, Jonah Wheeler, T-Mac, XXHJRI3AS7X. Wolf, Hyper Beams, Michael Murphy, Grand Region Kell, Sin Hunter, Deshaun Jones, Logan Bland, Alexander Johannes, Alex Morgan, Ray Various, Blaze, That Other Guy Too, Chad Reynolds, Zachariah Allison, T. Mackey 68 Rimuru, Nuh-uh, Kelvin Bowman, AZ Othros, Dweller of the Deepest Depths, Lone Wolf, The Lone One, Jacob Rops, Bully Maguire Shadow, Ameri B, Neostar Productions, Aciel Cardenas, Shaquan Simmons, Thunder, Elijah Saunders, Peter Hamilton, Freddie Rose, Omega, Akuma no Akami, Chris Talley, Remorsefuls, Black Vein, Joshua Hedrington, Aaron Abercrombie, Drift SK8er, Akeno Himejima, Corey Tokars, Kwan Yen Thompson, Yan, Devin Black, Crow, Dasher Games, Joe Bros, Rai Von Crimson River, Dante Alistor, Adam Yonkers, Blood Saints, Donna Cafe, Zeph, Howie60, Ignacio, Carlos Terry. Hope of the universe, the ultimate guardians, celestial tier supporters whose impact literally shines across the galaxy. Void Rot, Chaos Umbre, Noroi Uzumaki Uchiha, Keishon, Tayshawn Palmer, Coldbane 4, The Maniac 563, Debs, LS Morningstar, Marl, Spintown, Ike's Shoot 50, Greg Green, James, Juan, Zeno KJ. And that's Izuku Midoriya. Adamantium Bones, Logan's Soul, a healing factor that laughs at your best shot. A body count that would make a war general uncomfortable. Zero apologies. If you watched the whole damn thing, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, and stay close. The next one's even more unhinged. See you there.